燃え上がれガンダム。
Hello and welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here to set our GP bases and begin Plavsky particle dispersal. Because we are not talking about Mobile Suit Gundam. We're not talking about mecha anime. We're talking about the world of sport. Because we're talking about the wonderful show that is Gundam Build Fighters. The sports anime set in the Gundam franchise with a bunch of Gunpla and people making Gunpla and just having a good old fun time. It is the great crowd pleaser of all Gundam shows. And I'm very, very excited to talk about it today.
I am so excited. For a long time, Sean, I had obviously known this show existed. I'd heard you talk about it before, but I didn't really quite know what to expect. And then I sat down to watch the first episode, and by the time the credits rolled on that first episode, I was just like, oh, this is my shit. This is exactly my shit. I like this kind of sports anime thing, and this is even in the, specific brand of, sports anime I like, where it's a fucking tournament, and you've got a little bit of, heightened lunacy in it because it involves the Plavsky particle and stuff. This isn't Haikyuu. It's not, they're going and playing, an actual sport with, real-world rules. It's a little out there. It's got the fucking Yu-Gi-Oh! Touch of someone who comes from another world and just decides to play a silly game because that's the best thing he can do. It's ridiculous. It's wonderful. It's got a tournament. The tournament, unlike in G Gundam, makes sense, which I love. This is so my shit, Sean, and it is nigh a perfect show. It is 25 episodes. There is no wasted space. There is no slack in it. I love every single character. I love every fight. I love every episode. It is just a blast, and those last couple episodes in particular are the most crowd-pleasing, rousing, get-on-your-feet and cheer Gundam has ever been. And I cannot imagine what a Grinch you would have to be to not enjoy Gundam Build Fighters. If you have any love for Gundam, and frankly, if you don't like Gundam, it's just a fun show. It's so good, Sean.
Yeah, no, it is, it's a show that it's hard to imagine someone not liking it because it is just, it's a really, really strong action comedy show with this whole, kind of sportsy anime, plotting to it of, the tournament and all of that. But yeah, it's just, it is so light on its feet. It's got such heart to it. It loves its characters in the world of Gundam and Gunpla and the hobby and all that so much. And it's, it's got this just really, I think, kind of positive, life-affirming attitude and message about the pleasure and joy and meaning that people can find in trivial things in the modern world through their hobbies and their their what they're into and what they spend and invest their time and life into in this way that I think everyone can identify with in different ways. And it's, as I say, it's kind of a perfect show. It just knows exactly what it wants to be, and it is just incredibly efficient and effective at being what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, and it's such a refreshing show, too, I think, at this point in Gundam. I mean, we've loved the last couple of Gundam shows, but, we've been watching a lot of Gundam over the last couple of years on this show, Sean, and you definitely see, every show in the mainline Gundam universe, other than, honestly, G Gundam, which is the one that kind of exists in more of the Build Fighters vein, repeats certain types, and it has certain story things, Double O and Gundam Age are both, borrowing and tweaking and commenting on things from original Gundam and other Gundam shows, right? So, there's always some of that. And then Gundam Build Fighters is just kind of this burst into something completely new. It's something they haven't really done before. The closest analog would be G Gundam. It very clearly learns a lot of the lessons from G Gundam and kind of takes that to the next level. And it's such a fun detour that feels like, okay, Gundam, this is past the 30-year mark, is coming up with new ways to have fun with the franchise. And that's a really cool thing to see, this deep into the game.
Yeah, it's definitely this just like really fantastic palate cleanser of just feeling like, it's one of the reasons I was very excited to do this podcast, because I had so much fun when we did the Kimetsu no Yaiba podcast, and we have been doing podcasts on mecha shows for 2+ years at this point. And it's fun to be able to look at anime in a different genre. And that's one of the things about Gundam Build Fighters is, like, it legitimately just is not a mecha show. I don't think there's any reasonable way to, like, file this under the mecha genre, other than the fact that it's technically a part of the Gundam franchise. But that doesn't make it a mecha show on its own. It, like, very much literally is a sports anime, and that's where it, like, draws most of its influence in terms of its characters and its plotting. And there's something so fun about that, and not only is it one of those, like, it's one of the best of those, because it is a genre that I like a lot, both in the, like, more silly Yu-Gi-Oh, Hikaru no Go, that kind of, like, where you've got, like, weird supernatural elements and stuff mixed in with the sports. And then I also love stuff like Chihayafaru, March Comes In Like a Lion, Kuroko's Basketball. That's more straightforward. This is about basketball or karate or shogi or whatever the show is about, and it's just, like, more serious and more kind of dramatic. But sports anime it's a long-running, very, like, fulfilling genre in its own right, and it's really cool to see Gundam's sort of, like, the franchise take on what does Gundam look like in that genre.
Yes, I mean, I love this kind of thing. I would even include the best parts of Dragon Ball are this. I mean, like, the stuff with the Tenkaichi Budokai has always been my favorite parts of Dragon Ball, and that is just getting into straight, tournament brackets, that kind of stuff. Like, there's a reason why that stuff endures, and why, like, Dragon Ball Super leaned so hard into that like half of Dragon Ball Super is 2 different tournament arcs, right? This kind of stuff is just so fun. If we weren't talking about mecha anime all the time, Sean, I would be watching more sports anime stuff, because I love it. Like, I have all the shows you just named on my Crunchyroll, like, watch list, and it's like, well, I have to watch Gundam every week, but if I ever have time, I really want to see Chihayafuru and stuff like that. And Haikyuu, I'm sure, is great. I've never seen that. One's quite long.
Yeah,
but,
that's the one I haven't watched, because they keep on doing new seasons of it, and every time I'm about to watch it, I'm like, but that new season just started airing. I might as well wait for that to be done, and then something else happens. I'm like, oh shit! Now there's like 5 seasons, I think, of Haikyuu, and I know it's great.
It's going to end soon, because the manga ended, so there's not that much more left.
But, Haikyuu is the one that, like, I had maybe a dozen students who were, like, super into Haikyuu. Like, that show is, like, very popular with the kids these days.
Oh yeah, no, my roommate watched it. I've seen lots of people watch it. Yeah.
Yeah, people love the sports anime. It turns out,
and it's just it turns out to be a very natural fit for Gundam, but, like, even within that, I said this on Twitter several times, because I didn't know how else to say it. This is, like, a stupidly good show. Like, it did not have to be this good. It is crazy that moving into this, they are just so firm in what they want it to be, and the level of execution is just so ludicrously high. Like, this is, for what it is trying to do, this is as good as something like Gundam 00. Its aspirations, like, thematically are not as, like, complex as something like that. But again, for, like, its goals and ambitions, it is doing it about as well as you can imagine it being done. Because, as you said, it's just one of the best examples of this thing. It just happens to involve Gundam, and it involves it in a wonderful, wonderful way.
Yeah, and as proof of that, I think I maybe talked about this on the first episode of Weekly Suit Gundam. I don't remember. I might not have gotten into it, because it was like, there was a lot to talk about in that episode. But this is actually the first Gundam show I watched in full, because I had watched G Gundam and Gundam Wing when they were on Toonami and stuff. I didn't, like, watch every single episode. But I watched this after it originally aired in 2014, because I watched everything that was coming out in 2014, because I was in college and I had more free time, and watching 22-minute episodes of anime fit in for your weird, like, here's an hour gap between classes and stuff like that. So I was just watching everything. And so that would have been like 2 or 3 years before I started watching all the other. It would have been 2 years before I started watching actual Gundam stuff. So I watched this show originally without knowing anything really about Gundam outside of very basic, like, this is what a Gundam looks like, and that they're technically mobile suits, not Gundams, and stuff like that. Like, I knew some of that basic stuff and what a Gundam wing and a G Gundam looked like, but I had never seen Mobile Suit Gundam or anything like that at that point, and was not into mecha anime as a broad thing, but I liked... This would have been at the same time that I watched Chihayafuru and Kuroko's Basketball and a lot of that stuff for the first time. So I watched this show when it came out and really enjoyed it a lot. And I think is a testament to the show and the intelligence of the show's construction, that is something that is both like easily digestible and enjoyable by someone who has no experience with the franchise at all. Because they have Reiji as a co-protagonist that has no idea what Gundam is either, so they can filter a lot of those questions and that stuff through him, and you kind of watch it through his perspective as an audience if you don't know what Gundam is. And then if you watch it and you are a big fan of Gundam and you've made Gunpla kits and you've watched every show leading up to this point, and you can quote, along with, say, the like scene where Amuro gets slapped by Bright and he's like, so nani chisai ningen desu ka, and all that shit. Like, if you can just recite that scene off the top of your head, you know, then the show shines even brighter, because then, like, you're seeing all this really, really fun, like, lighthearted comedy playing with, like, all these different ridiculous aspects and references from the very broad history of the franchise. And so the show is... It's one of the things that the thing is most impressive about the show's construction. It's its ability to both be something that everyone can enjoy and something that will specifically please long-term fans of the franchise in these very specific niche kinds of ways, and that those coexist and make each other better, and they, instead of them kind of like making the show kind of fall apart because it can't play to either audience effectively.
Yeah, I said this on Twitter last night. I don't know if anyone involved in the show has said this, but it feels to me like this must have been the first Gundam show where they sat down and said, we want to make a Gundam show that is like specifically for like parents who watched Gundam to watch with their kids now that they're adults, right? There's some feeling like that of like, because it is so accessible. And I actually I don't know if you've told me that, Sean, that this was the first one you saw. I'm sure you did mention it, but I just don't remember that. And that's my sense watching it was, I think anyone could enjoy this, but that's proof that you just told me that anyone could enjoy this. But also, even as it's doing that, it's not just like referencing like the popular Gundam stuff. Like, one of the main characters, Mao, is piloting and making constant references to After War Gundam X, the Gundam show that was such a ratings disaster it got canceled. Like, it is incredibly granular with its references. It's, you know, doing the speech that Amuro has in episode 9 of Mobile Suit Gundam and calling it out by name. It is just constantly, you know, it full-on brings in Crossbone Gundam at the end. Like, it is very granular down in the weeds, and threading that needle is such a weird thing. I don't think I can think of an analog that is both that granular for the fans and just such a big crowd pleaser for anyone. I don't think you need to know anything about Gundam to get to that final episode and be like, this is awesome and crowd pleasing and I want to stand up and cheer, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of franchises that can even try to pull it off if they wanted to, right? Because there are very few things that have the kind of media legacy that Gundam has in the first place. And part of it is that it's not just Gundam, it is also Gunpla, right? So it is both about this whole anime franchise, but it is also about this like 30 plus year old long running hobby that by 2013 was the like most successful, both in terms of a like commercial sense, but also just in terms of like means of manufacture and production and design of any real like model kit thing on the planet, in terms of like certainly at their cost level. Like, you can get $1,000+ model of a plane or something that is going to be more sophisticated than a Gunpla you're going to make, but you're not going to find anything that is like a $200 model that's going to be anywhere near the level of like quality of build, enjoyment of build, quality of manufacture and posability and all that kind of stuff as like a perfect grade Gunpla figure that's like a modern figure. It's the best in the world at that kind of thing. And so its love for the Gunpla hobby as well as the Gundam anime franchise is also, I think, part of where that kind of joy and warmth and love comes from with the show.
Exactly. And, you know, Gunpla is not as popular in our world as it is in Gundam Build Fighters, where there are whole stores just in small towns devoted to it. But it is like, you know, as you say, Sean, its legacy is vast and huge, to the point that, you know, I have a hobby store here in Iowa City in, you know, the middle of America, and it's by the movie theater, and every time I go to a movie, I then go into that hobby store and just like see what Gunpla they have, and that's where I've gotten like my Gundam markers and stuff like that. And it is, so it is truly like, it's not just a big thing in Japan, it's a cross-cultural legacy of Gundam. I mean, Gunpla was big here before Gundam was big here, right? And Gunpla is the thing that initially helped make Gundam successful. It is as much a part of the legacy of Gundam as anything else. And, why the heck not make a show out of it and find a fun way to do it? And I do love that, like, in the midst of it is both build and fighters, right? In the midst of all the big action sequences and fights, which are great, it also has a big focus on the building and the creativity and, while also not coming off like a crass commercial. Because there's another pitfall for this could very easily be it just being a little cloying and like, please go buy Gunpla. And it's not. It feels like loving and celebratory, and, yes, part of the reason the show exists is to go get you to buy Gunpla, but every Gundam show exists for that, at least a little bit. This one's just a little more upfront about it. And you know what? I do love building Gunpla, and it makes me feel good. So why the hell not?
Yeah, I mean, if it was not for this show, I never would have built Gunpla. Like, it was watching this show that made me, like, because I'm not a hobby person. Like, as soon as it was possible for me not to take arts and crafts type classes at school, I didn't take them. Like, as soon as it wasn't, like, part of the mandatory elementary whatever thing that you couldn't choose classes, it's just not a thing that, like, I've ever been attracted to. And it's always been something I kind of assumed, I can't make something like that because I'm just not good at that kind of thing. But watching Gundam Build Fighters, it both, like, is a very effective basic level tutorial at what making Gunpla is. Like, it shows you what all the tools are. It shows you some, like the basic techniques and stuff like that. And it shows how accessible and how anyone can do it. And you watch some of those episodes of, like, Meiji making his own Gunpla, and I was like, I can fucking do that. I'm an adult man. I can do this. If this like anime boy can do it. And I bought that RX-78 like high grade Gunpla model and built it and had a great time. And I now have like 7 of those fucking things. So it's like this show is very good at what it does. And I love that it sold me on that product, because it's something I never would have explored, like this part of me that enjoys the meditative experience of building something. And this kind of exposed me to that is a part of like who I am and something that I can enjoy, and it kind of broadened my horizons in a certain way.
To some degree, that's the mark of a good sports anime, is how much it makes you want to go do the thing, right? Like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Makes you want to go play Yu-Gi-Oh! Or other card games like it. Pokemon makes you want to go play Pokemon with your friends. Hikaru no Go created like an entire like new resurgence of Go around the entire world, right? Like, I remember reading that in Jump monthly back when I was a kid, and like, I've forgotten some of it, but I did go like learn some about Go because I'm like, this is pretty cool, and I'd actually that's one I'd actually love to go back to because it is a cool manga. But anyway, and this one totally does the same thing. Like, I have a little Gunpla story. So I built a bunch of Gunpla when we first started doing this podcast. I did several in like quick succession. I was having a lot of fun with it, and then around the time I went to Japan, I had a half-finished Gundam Mark II that I was working on. And then I got back, and I was kind of between Iowa and Colorado a little bit because of COVID. And for whatever reason, like, I kind of put it in a corner and forgot about it for a long time. And then when I was watching this show, I'm like, well, I want to go build Gunpla because Build Fighters is so fun, and I want to do that. And so I went and dug out, and it was a little dusty, but I cleaned it up and finished my Mark II. So I finished that. It was a lot of fun. And then I wanted to get more Gunpla because I wanted to do another one. And I had a whole wish list I had made, and I was going through those. And I actually did not realize this until I looked into it. There is a Gunpla shortage right now around the world because of probably COVID supply chains, but also people have been doing it more in COVID because it's a fun thing to do while you're at home. It is a safe, fun activity. And so they're a little hard to find. They're out of stock at a lot of the normal stores you would go to find them. And like, if you were to, like, I used to get a lot of them on Amazon because different stores will sell them on Amazon, and they're all like price gouged crazy, like the Goof Custom that I've been wanting to get, which is normally like $20 is like 50, that kind of thing. So I couldn't really find any of the ones I wanted. But my hobby store, I went to my hobby store the other day, and they were pretty much out of Gunpla, at least Gundam Gunpla. They had a bunch of other stuff, like they had some Evangelion ones. They do have a pretty cool, like, perfect grade, like it's the Eva 6 that looks pretty cool that I might have to get at some point when I have money. But they didn't really have, I think they had one, like, perfect grade of, like, the Gundam Wing that, like, was like $100 that I wasn't really like looking for. I was looking for one of the normal high grade kits. But Sean, they had one normal high grade Gundam kit at my hobby store, and it was one I would never ever ever have thought to get on my own. But because it was the only one they had there, it was only $16, and I thought this is too good a story to pass up. I bought and am now working on a Gunpla of the Death Army mobile suit from Mobile Fighter G Gundam.
Okay, yeah.
I think this is a new one. I think that's why the hobby store has it. I think they just put this out, but it is a high-grade kit. It's honestly the simplest high-grade kit I've seen, because it's a pretty simple mobile suit. It doesn't have a lot of weapons and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, because that's the one where they have like 100 of those on the screen, so it's a very simple design so that they can animate it without like killing their staff.
Yes. Well, and in fact, Sean, the box, it's so funny, the box has in small print, because the picture on it is a bunch of Death Army robots, and it says, this kit only comes with one Death Army robot. It's like very funny. But I've been working on it, and you know what? That's fun. It's fun to just go to the hobby store and be like, I would never have built a Death Army robot, but you know, $16? Sure, I'll go build the Death Army, and that'll be a fun to have, and it's a fun story, and it's unique. And those experiences are just cool to have too, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. Gunpla is a fantastic hobby. It's like one of the things that I'm trying to get a better setup here, because I have my Master Grade Turn A Gundam that I started making literally a year ago at this point. I'm like halfway done with it. I have the head, the torso, the two arms. And then I stopped because I got so busy with like teaching, and that semester was so fucking crazy that I was like, I'm just going to put this off and finish it when summer comes around, not knowing that when summer came around, I ended up moving to fucking Texas. And so I'm like literally looking at the box right now. But the only table I still currently have is this one temp table that I'm using with all of my podcast setup. So I don't have a good setup to do my gun plot. It is frustrating. But yeah, it's a great hobby. And one thing that I saw a video that popped up in my YouTube recommendations, that's a new video from like literally 2 or 3 days ago, that if there's anybody else listening to this podcast that like me grew up watching Mythbusters, there's a video of Adam Savage from Mythbusters making a perfect grade Gundam, like the RX-78-2 Gundam. That is the first time he's ever made one of those. But if people didn't know Adam Savage that much from Mythbusters, like one of the things is that he like literally like part of his job was making movie props and stuff like that. So he is a like professional level model builder and stuff. And watching this 20-minute video of him and a couple of other people working in a shop putting together a Gunpla, and his mind being blown about how like efficient and well put together it is, and the instructions and and he goes into like how the plastic molding works, and how it's like, I can't believe that like the amount of articulations they're able to get with this like plastic mold and all this shit. It is really fascinating to watch. I highly recommend, if you just Google Adam Savage Tested is what his channel is. It's like one of his most recent videos.
That came up in my recommends too, so that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yes, so I'd highly recommend checking it out, because it makes you admire the process even more when you see someone at a professional level kind of breaking down, this is why these kits are so goddamn impressive. The fact that they're, you know, able to do these pictorial instructions that are technically in Japanese, right? Like whenever there's any text, it's in Japanese. They don't translate them typically. So, but they are able to sell them in any country because you don't need any language. You can just look at the instructions and put it together. And I've had to put together a lot of fucking furniture since we moved to this goddamn house. So I've been looking at a lot of instructions, and they're all shit. And then you look at a Gunpla instruction, it's like, this thing is 1,000 times more complicated to put together than a little table or whatever, which is like 7 pieces with some screws. But it is infinitely easier to understand how to put these together than anything I bought at an IKEA or something like that.
I think that all the time, Sean. Like, I built a big Lego kit a couple years ago. I got this special edition Steamboat Willie black and white Disney kit, which I really love that I have it. It's one of the coolest Lego sets out there. But, like, the Lego instructions pale in comparison to Gunpla instructions. Like, I frequently get confused with Lego instructions. Gunpla, like, I feel like anyone building instructions for anything, like software, hardware, go build a Gunpla and go, oh, we should make it like this. Because it is like universal. A child could understand it in any language.
Yeah, and that is the thing about Gundam Build Fighters, right? Is that it captures that. Like, it captures that this is what this, like, the freeness and accessibility of this hobby it's in that like that feeling of warmth and joy you get. Like Gundam Build Fighters, I think that's the thing about the show. I guess we should probably start getting into it more. Is that it really embodies that feeling in a way that I've never seen a show able to capture that so much of that kind of like the love of being a hobbyist. It's a cool topic and it's a cool energy to try to capture for a show, and Gundam Build Fighters does it expertly.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into a little bit of the history of the show and kind of how it came about. So really the genesis of Gundam Build Fighters comes from a 3-part OVA that came out in 2010 that we're going to do for our, like, we're going to do 3 episodes on Build Fighter stuff. It's Build Fighters Try the sequel, and then we'll do a catch-all episode because there's a lot of little specials. There's some OVAs that come out after Try, all that, and then there's also this 3-part OVA series where some of the ideas comes from. We're just going to put all that in that 3rd episode because it would be a weird thing to kind of glom onto this Gundam Build Fighters thing. But just to kind of set up where it comes from, for the 30-year anniversary of like the Gunpla line of toys in 2010, they produced this 3-part OVA called Model Suit Gunpla Builders Beginning G, which is kind of has a similar basic premise to Gundam Build Fighters, and it's written by the same guy, the Yosuke Kudada, who also did the script for this OVA. But it's basically about this kid whose dad takes him to Odaiba, and they see the Gundam, and he buys him a Gunpla kit, and the kid's like, oh, this is awesome. He makes a Gunpla, and then instead of it being this like Plavsky particle thing, it's more of there's like this VR kind of looking station thing that they go to, almost like it looks like you go to like laser tag, but you get to this big booth, and then it scans your Gunpla, and then you do Gundam fights. And the show is very, very light on plot. It's mostly an excuse to advertise a new line of Gunpla that they did, including the beginning Gundam, which is then referenced in Build Fighters because that's the one that Reiji makes when he makes his first Gunpla, is the beginning Gundam from this show.
A legitimately very cool Gundam. The Tri Beam Saber, I want that. That's great.
Yeah, it's a very good design. So the show is an excuse to sell those, and then also there is some very good fight animation. It is very gorgeously animated. It's only about 40 minutes long in total, but it's a very nice looking thing. So we'll go into that in detail when we do the kind of catch-all specials episode. But that's where sort of some of the basic idea comes from. And then, so a couple years after that, Bandai Hobby, which is the sort of department in Bandai Namco where they do all their hobby products like Gunpla, they went to Sunrise and said, hey, we want to make a full anime kind of out of this idea. We want to make an anime based on Gunpla, boost Gunpla sales, all that kind of stuff. It's a smart business choice. And so Ogawa, who is a producer at Sunrise, was kind of given this project, and he, with a couple other people, started workshopping some ideas, and that's where, like, the idea of let's do like a tournament, let's do this whole like Plavsky particle thing and have them move through these like particles and all that started coming from that process. And so then the time came to pick a creative team, and when they were picking that, they went to 2 people who were really important figures on Double O Gundam. So they took the story writer, the script writer from Double O Gundam, which is Yosuke Kudada, who also had done that beginning G thing, and they brought him onto the project. And then Kudada had someone he had always wanted to do a big show with since Double O Gundam, which was the assistant director, or one of the assistant directors on Double O Gundam, who was Kenji Nagasaki, who I guess they really hit it off, and they wanted to do a show together. So they kind of brought both those guys on, and then they also brought on a composer, Yuki Hayashi, who had done a bunch of different shows at that point, and then their partnership, why that's important, will become clear in a little bit.
He becomes a big composer in the years to come.
Yes, he becomes a very big composer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he becomes on, and he also does great work on this show, which we'll get to that when we talk about the show itself. But so they come on, and then they start kind of building up the idea of Gundam Build Fighters and fleshing it out, and then they make the show with a lot of like returning staff from Double O Gundam and Gundam Age. One of the points of the project also was specifically to make it so that it was like a kind of family show. Like they didn't say specifically so dads who grew up with Gundam can watch with their kids, but it was made with a clear choice to make it something that it was an all ages kind of project. So kind of like Gundam Age, which Ogawa was also a producer on. It was like they wanted to make it a Gundam series that was very accessible to younger children, obviously because also they want to sell Gunpla to those children. So they make Gundam Build Fighters, and Gundam Build Fighters is a massive success. It's really well liked, but then it massively boosts the sale of Gunpla when it comes out. The Gundam Build Strike was the best-selling Gunpla figure of 2013. Like Bear Guy-san, there's a fun story about that Gunpla model was out of stock for like a really long time because they just way undersold it. Like they thought that the demand was going to be a lot smaller than it was, foolishly, because as soon as you see Bear Guy-san, you're like, well, this is going to be the best Gunpla fucking ever. And so, like,
it's out of stock right now. I've been trying to find one, and there's been another run on Bear Guy because I cannot find Bear Guy-san. It's making me mad. I want my Bear Guy.
Yes, and so basically most of the big figures like the Zaku Amazing and stuff like that from Gundam Build Fighters sell super well for good reason, because they're really cool models, and then like the show does just such a good job of selling you on the idea of it. And then Gundam Build Fighters is also obviously super successful because it basically spawns an entire sub-franchise that is still ongoing within Gundam, because they then make a sequel, Gundam Build Fighters Try, which has the same writer, Kudada works on that, but Nagasaki leaves at that point. And obviously we'll get into all that stuff when we get to Try for the next episode. And then eventually you get all these OVAs like GM's Counterattack and stuff like that. Then you get Gundam Build Divers. Then you get Gundam Build Divers Re-Rise. So this whole sub-series is spawned because of how just fucking great Gundam Build Fighters is and how well it did as a product. But also I think part of the story of Gundam Build Fighters in the modern anime, you can't ignore another thing that happens, which is about 2 years after Gundam Build Fighters, this same basic creative team of Nagasaki, the director, Kudada, the writer, and Yuki Hayashi, the music composer, all came together to work on and are still working on a little franchise people might know called My Hero Academia. So if you have watched My Hero Academia and you have watched Gundam Build Fighters, that the fact that the major top-level creatives on the show are the same people probably is not super surprising, because there you can see so much of the same DNA. My Hero is a much more like specifically dramatic show because of the source material, but like the lightness of the pacing and the lightness on its feet, the warmth with how it treats its characters, the like incredible musical score, especially when you get some of the big swelling songs and stuff like that. This team turns around in a couple of years and again is still like, those are still the people driving the My Hero anime franchise, and like Nagasaki has directed all 3 of the My Hero movies and all that kind of stuff. So this kind of creative team moves on to continue to do some really rad shit in modern anime, which is very cool.
Yeah, this is definitely has made me want to watch My Hero more than I've ever wanted to before. I've wanted to. It's just basically it's because it's one of the longer ones out there now. Mm-hmm. I mean, specifically now. I know it's not a Naruto or something, but
anime. Says the guy reading and watching One Piece.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I'm caught up on the One Piece manga, so it was fine. One a week, I'm good. The anime, I'm caught up on the current arc, which is just one arc. Anyway, yeah. So, but it also I mentioned earlier that I think Build Fighters is as good a show as Double O, just in a different way. It makes sense because, as you say, a lot of the Double O legacy lives on here and then goes on to My Hero. I love that Double O was clearly a pretty landmark series in modern anime, because you can still feel the reverberations throughout the industry of those creatives going on to do really cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. Because I had known the My Hero connection. Until researching, I didn't realize that, these are a couple of the major figures on Double O. Obviously, it's not the director of Double O didn't do this, but the assistant director also has a lot of influence in the direction and feel and style of a show. So that team continuing forward, it's very cool.
And the animation style feels like it's somewhere between Double O and Gundam Age. Like it's got a little bit more of some of the roundedness of Gundam Age, but overall, the character designs. I think the way the mobile suits look in particularly looks a lot like Double O to me, which I think is a really nice sweet spot for modern digital anime Gundam. It's just a good way to make those mobile suits look and move and everything. So it's
the fact that they are literally supposed to be plastic models makes the slightly flatter look of digital animation work so much better for them, that it sells you on the whole setting and the idea of the world, and they play into it by playing with scale and stuff like that to make you aware of these are actually little tiny figures that are little dinky plasticky things at all times.
Yes, they have a lot of fun with it. Well, cool. That's I like hearing the history of this one, because it is one of the more pivotal entries in Gundam, because, as you say, it spawned this whole other franchise that we're going to be doing many more episodes on in the near and then long-term future.
Yeah, because I've only seen like I think what is like the first 3 episodes of Build Divers, which until I realized I can't be watching a new Gundam show while I'm also watching old Gundam shows for this podcast because it's making my head confused. So I gave up watching that pretty early. I was like, I'll just watch it for the first time when we fucking get to it, rather than try to get ahead of the podcast. So like the Build franchise is one of like the major concerns going forward for Gundam, and it's largely because Gundam Build Fighters is so fucking good.
What do you think? What do you think is the better sub-franchise, this or SD Gundam?
I mean, I've the only SD Gundam stuff I've watched is the really awful Toonami CG only show that was co-produced by like Toonami, so it's actually an American show effectively from like 2004. That thing is garbage. And then some of like the little shorts they played in some of the old movies are actually kind of fun, but other than that, SD Gundam seems pretty. It's if this is Gundam, if Gundam Build Fighters is Gundam but for kids, SD Gundam feels like Gundam but for like toddlers, right? It's got like a Teletubbies like this is the like Blue's Clues version of Gundam is what any like SD Gundam thing I've seen that's not the super old stuff that is more just like movie shorts. Yeah, SD Gundam's not for me.
When you say that, I would totally watch Blue's Clues but for Gundam. That sounds pretty good. You got Steve getting in a mech at the end. It'd be great.
It would be very, yeah, and then, you find out that Steve was actually a child soldier when he was younger. Blue is a cyber new type dog. It's a whole thing. It's very dramatic.
I want to know who Char is in the world of Blue's Clues.
He's the guy who took over for Steve at some point, and you're like, well, this isn't my Blue's Clues, and you're like 5 years or 8 years old at that point. You're like, well, probably shouldn't be watching Blue's Clues anyways.
All right. Sounds good. So now do you want to dive in and just talk about this fucking great show?
Yeah, let's go ahead and let's talk about how fucking awesome Gundam Build Fighters is. Well, where do you want to start, Jonathan?
I want to start with Sei and Reiji, and both the main characters and the first episode, because this show has one of the great Gundam premieres. Like, it is just, it hooks you and it sells you on what is honestly a pretty big premise to sell, right? Like, especially if you've been watching a lot of Gundam, this is a big shift. They've got to introduce things like the Plavsky particle and like buy you into kind of the ridiculous hyper reality of this show, which is very much in that sports anime vein of like, it's our world, but they care about this one specific thing more than anything else, right? You know? And then kind of like, and every sports anime does that. Every, as grounded as you're going to get, whether it's basketball or what's the game in Shihayafuru? It's,
Karuta.
Yeah, like Karuta.
Like the card game. Yeah.
Right. It's like this one kind of like niche thing that is like everyone on Earth cares about. And then you can kind of layer on like your Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something or your Hikaru no Go, like how much mysticism are you putting on top of that? And I would say Gundam Build Fighters has a light, like a sprinkling of that, because it does have some interdimensional bullshit. But you're always going to have that, and you kind of have to sell that reality. But you also have to like introduce us to these characters in their world. And I just think that first episode does a really great job of Sei is just instantly a great character. Reiji is he is one of the funniest Gundam characters ever, and he is right off the bat. Sei's mom has got it going on. We'll talk about that. You meet Mr. Ral. Oh my god. It's just, this is a show that really hits the ground running. And Gundam shows frequently hit the ground running, but this is, especially because this is 25 episodes, it's got to do it fast, and I just can't imagine not being sold on the project by the end of episode 1.
Yeah, and so I think something about Build Fighters that I love so much that I think, Gundam used to be, like, incredible at, and then as most modern anime did, it gets a little bit, like, sort of fuzzier, is that, like, episode-by-episode pacing, right? So Build Fighters goes back to this very classic Gundam, old-school Gundam model of you have a fight every fucking episode. Like, come hell or high water, you're at the fucking inn or whatever, and it doesn't seem possible that there could possibly be a Gundam fight. There is, right? Because every episode...
Gunpla Yakuza! Because that's the kind of world this is. It's great.
And so every episode is structured around, usually like the first half is like sort of character setting and kind of building up whatever the core kind of conflict is at the heart of the episode. And then you have your mid-episode break, and then you come back, and that's where then it's like, okay, now it's time for the actual big fight of the episode, usually featuring Sei and Neji. And then as it goes on, sometimes you get like a Meijin Kawaguchi episode and stuff like that. But the like choice, the very deliberate choice to say every single episode not only is going to have a fight, but it's going to be the centerpiece of the episode, right? Like the episode is going to be focused around in some way. Eventually, there's going to be some sort of fight. You know, in the tournament, very much so. A little bit lighter in some of like the side episodes, but even the side episodes, they'll have like a big fight in the second half. And that focuses the pacing of the show so well in that way that kind of harkens back to original Mobile Suit Gundam, where it's like, no matter what, someone's going to get in this fucking Gundam and someone's going to fight a Zaku or some horse shit, because it has to happen every episode no matter what, because we're selling these toys, we're making it for the kids, we're doing all that kind of stuff. And for some shows, if it's done poorly, that can be incredibly exhausting. But if it's done well, it's just such a solid spine to like individual episodes, and it gives it such a tight fucking structure. And that's true of every episode in Gundam Build Fighters. Is every episode stands so well on its own, is totally enjoyable as its own story, embedded in this larger narrative with larger character arcs and stuff like that. And you get that like right off the bat with that first episode, where this isn't a Zeta Gundam thing where, you know, it takes 2 episodes to kind of deliver the core premise or something like that. This is no, you watch that first episode and you know who the two main characters are, you know, like what the setting of the world is, you know, like this is going to be the core dynamic, is that Sei is the kid who's really good at building the Gunpla, and Reiji is the guy who's really good at fighting them. And you also get kind of one of the core character dynamics, which is that way that they kind of compensate for each other's weaknesses, that Sei knows what the Gunpla in Gundam World is that Reiji doesn't, but Reiji knows how to pilot them. And then obviously both characters grow to fill in their own weaknesses over the course of the show, and that's kind of the centerpiece of the ending, is Sei, you know, growing into his own, not just as a builder but also as a fighter. And all that is set up just in one 22-minute episode because it's so tightly paced.
Yes, and you know, I think that episodic structure is also helped by, this is a 25-episode show. This is the first 25-episode Gundam show we've talked about. I think in some sense you could argue Double O is 2 25-episode shows, and there's a definite feel of like the one-season thing works really well here again, and that's part of what makes this work so well. But yeah, I agree, and I think also in that first episode, if you've watched this kind of thing before, you see the shape of it right away. And that is a feature, not a bug, right? Like, you see the overall shape that this is going to be. They're going to come together. They're going to do the local tournament. They're going to do the big tournament. They're probably going to win at the end. Reiji is going to have to leave and go back to his world. You know, Sei is going to be alone, but he's going to be a complete person. You, like, see where it's going to go. And again, that is a feature, not a bug. That is part of the pleasure, I think, of good sports stories like this, of something like a Rocky or the Karate Kid or something like that, right? Cobra Kai is a show on Netflix right now that I think has done that very well, where I think a lot of us predicted what the overall shape of that show would be in season 1, and they're doing it, and that's a pleasure, because there's something both comforting and also, like, right about like the archetypes work, and you don't need to try to undermine those. And I think Gundam Build Fighters plants that flag pretty early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of very no nonsense with it establishing a lot of its premise. Like watching Gundam Build Fighters again, for what I guess this is like the third time I've watched it, because I watched it when it came out, then I watched it in my original Gundam viewing, and now I watched it again. I'm always shocked in that original Mobile Suit Gundam kind of way of like how quickly it's able to move through stuff, that in my head it takes like way longer for them to get through that initial tournament, but that initial tournament is done in 6 episodes. Like they blow through some of that like early setup stuff instead of being like, okay, let's have a couple of episodes kind of padding it out. They know how to sort of just say, and that's part of the benefit of it being 25 episodes, as opposed to traditionally this kind of show would be at least a whole year, if not even longer. You know, because this is, you know, if you're doing the more kids-focused sports anime, that's a lot of that stuff is the stuff that, like a Yu-Gi-Oh show that just goes fucking forever, until eventually like, now let's do a new one, but they're on motorcycles, and have that go for like 5 years. But the tightness of this, there's just let's just move to the next plot beat. Let's just move to the next thing. And you keep that pace up throughout the series so nicely that it's like when you watch Mobile Suit Gundam and you're like, you're telling me they only spend 1 fucking episode on the moon? Like, how is that possible that that was 1 episode? It must be a whole like 3 episode story arc or something. Build Fighters has like that exact same effect to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that first episode is also just, it grips you with its premise, because the premise has this great sort of two-pronged thing of the sports approach and then the buddy comedy thing that we have going on with Sei and Reiji. And again, that is not like, this is not the first show to try something like this. There is like the obvious Yu-Gi-Oh comparison, but this obviously, I think, one-ups something like Yu-Gi-Oh by having both halves of that character of pairing be really interesting on their own terms, Like, Yu-Gi-Oh is one where Dark Yugi and Yugi are different characters, but Dark Yugi so overtakes that show, and Little Yugi never really comes into his own as a character, I think, until maybe... There's some points in the manga where maybe, but it's I think a significant weakness of that story at certain points. And because you have Sei and Reiji, they're literally different people, but also they're very good about, like, not having the boy from the other dimension overpower things. Sei is a great, interesting character on his own terms. And Reiji also is not, like, bogged down by, like, wanting to get back to his world or all of the different pitfalls that could kind of, like, overburden this show with lore. I love that first episode is just, he meets this strange boy who gives him this magical orb. He makes a wish. That final fight against the dickhead kid who loves the Gyan is just so entertaining, and it's just such a big, like, get on your feet moment when Reiji comes in and pilots the Gunpla for him and, like, grants his wish. And you see the shape of it, like I said, and you're just sold on it on both of those levels, because you want to see this character dynamic play out, and you want to see more of the cool Gunpla battles.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is like that co-protagonist structure that is the heart of the show, right? It is the skill with which both those characters feel like they are full protagonists in their own right? Like, this show is a true two-hander between the two of them. Like, Sei is definitely, like, the most center protagonist of the show, because he's the first character you meet and he's the last character you see. But very much it is about these two characters meeting and growing with each other. And yeah, they don't... This is something true throughout most of the character relationships. They don't try to overburden or over-dramatize it, right? There's not, like, the big falling out that Sei and Reiji have at, like, the midpoint of the series or something. Like, sometimes they'll have an argument here or there, but they're, like, buddies through thick and thin in this very, like, nice way that, like, children's friendships often are, right? That it's not, it's not burdened with, like, the complexities of when people get older, and sometimes there's a lot of other stuff that can get involved in friendships and shit like that. It's just this very simple, like, no, we like each other, we're good friends, we both, like, bounce off of each other, and we make up for each other's weaknesses, and we're gonna be partners and, like, work through this thing together. And that's kind of it. And the show knows that's enough. It does. You don't have to have the big dramatic misunderstanding that they didn't have to get over. And it's true of, again, most of the character relationships. It's true of, like, Sei's relationship with China and that whole side of the show. It's not we have to have, like, multiple arcs of them getting into fights or, like, jealousies and shit like that. It's like, no, these are characters that like each other, and they just gradually grow to like each other more and become and, like, grow as characters more through their relationship over the course of the show. And that's enough. It's got this very nice, like, slice of life kind of energy to it, of that anime genre that is very low on conflict, very low on genre, and is more about enjoying spending time with characters for its own sake, rather than it being, like, something that has to be motivated through strong plot reasons. And I love how much Gundam Build Fighters grabs that energy while still being able to have its core plot and its core themes and its, like, action and all that stuff that does drive it forward. But the characters are more informed by you just wanting to spend time with them.
Well, and absolutely, and I think that that side of the show serves the other side of it. Like, it's very something you want in a sports anime like this. And I actually think this is one of the biggest lessons this show learns from some of the flaws of G Gundam. And I love G Gundam. I will always stand G Gundam. It's not a perfect show, obviously. And one of that show's weaknesses, we talked about that at the time and have talked about since, is that it's like 50 episodes is probably too much for what that show is doing.
Yeah.
And it also has a fairly small set of characters. And so G Gundam has this problem of having a pretty small core cast that it stretches out over 50 episodes. And so you do have repetitive character pairings and repetitive character dynamics where there's really, like, I love Chibody Cricket, but there's only so much you can do with him until you're doing a clown episode.
There's only so many times that Domon and Rain can have a falling out over the course of a 50-episode TV show. Like, some of those times are really effective, and other times it's like, like, how many times could these characters possibly have a fight and, like, run away from each other? Like, this has been the 7th time it's happened over the course of the past 2 fucking episodes somehow.
Yeah. And so Gundam Build Fighters, I think, is really smart, and it starts doing it right away, of building a big cast. There are a lot of characters. Like, you get to know, of those, like, final 16, like 8 to 10 really well are just like central characters to the show, main cast members. You have Mr. Fellini, and you have Meijin Kawaguchi, and you have Aina, and you have just all you have Mao, my favorite character, and you have the samurai boy.
Yes, early genius himself.
You just have all these characters, and those are just the fighters. You then have you have Sei's mom, and you have China, and you have some of the other people at school, and you have
got
Mr.
Ramba motherfucking Rao. The blue giant is here.
We'll talk about it. You have Mr. Rao. And you have lots and lots of characters who are vibrant and big and do not necessarily come in overburdened with conflict and lore, which means you can work with them pretty fast. And you do it in a compressed time span of 25 episodes, which means that Gundam Build Fighters over 25 episodes always has something to cut to. There's no point where you're starting an episode or cutting to a B plot and you're repeating a character dynamic in a like non-fresh way. Like, it's always moving forward and doing new stuff. There are obviously character pairings you come back to a lot, like Sei and Reiji or Reiji and Aina, but they're always moving forward on that level. And then when you cut to other matches, you're never having to like repeat fights, you're never having to like repeat character conflicts. You're always moving forward and having something fresh with us every episode. And you'll forget about a character, and then they'll cut back and go like, I love that character and this is so fun. And that's what you need, I think, for something like this, because I think a sports anime by definition like has to be kind of high energy, right? You have to have to keep that energy up. And I think the number of vibrant characters this show has helps with that. On the last episode of the podcast, we did some of the main show, the Weekly Stuff podcast. We did some listener mail, and someone asked what Gundam show has the best cast. And Sean, you said we both said it's original Mobile Suit Gundam. Yeah. But you said if not original Mobile Suit Gundam, your answer was Gundam Build Fighters. I think I might be with you on that. Like, Gundam Build Fighters has a fantastic cast, and I think it kind of has to be as good and as addictive as it is.
Yeah, because it's a show that leans on its cast more than other Gundam shows because it's like inherently less plot focused. Because the plot of Gundam Build Fighters is very simple, right? It is a tournament. Like, that's it. Like, the whole show is this one tournament. It is Sei and Reiji meet each other. They want to enter the tournament, right? So they enter the preliminary tournament, and they have like good smaller goals and motivations along the way that kind of like help build up the structure. So a lot of that is around Yuki, who then bails out and he becomes Meijin Kawaguchi, all that stuff. But they win the preliminaries. They then go to the world tournament. They meet all these people at the world tournament and they start competing there. And then you have your sort of other parallel plot line at that point, which is the chairman, who is also from the parallel world with Reiji, and he wants to stop them from winning because he's going to expose the secrets of the plastic particles and know that this guy is like a petty thief or whatever, and bring him back to the parallel world that Reiji is from. And so you have the machinations of the chairman, and then you have the dynamics of the tournament, and that's the entire fucking plot of the entirety of Gundam Build Fighters, right? Compare that to something like if you tried to explain what the plot is of the first season of 00 Gundam, you can't do that in 2 or 3 sentences. It's just not possible. There are too many characters, too many plot, like political dynamics, too many things going on there to try to contain it in something like that, because it's a much more plot-focused show, the way that most Gundams are, because they're big war stories. This isn't a big war story. It's a small-scale, like, low-stakes sports show, and it plays with that, and it knows that, right? It's one of the joys of the show is that normally Gundam is a world that is life or death, and it's full of trauma and child soldiers and people who have been manipulated and abused to kill their friends and all the kind of awful shit that happens. There's shows about war and death and trauma and like weapons technology and being ripped from your family and all those kinds of things. And Gundam Build Fighters is fundamentally about the exact opposite of that. And they call it out. They like lampshade it in the show. When in a very early episode, the show... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to talk... I was wondering when I was going to bring this up, but I wanted to bring this up because Mr. Rowell has a speech.
Yes.
That to me is the thematic thesis statement of the show.
Yes.
Because Gundam Build Fighters is not as thematically complex as a 00 Gundam. It is not commenting on like Middle East Forever Wars or anything like that. But it is a show with ideas on its mind. I made a joke tweet the other night that like this show has a great message, which is buy Gunpla and be happy. And that is one of the messages of the show.
Yes.
But I think the more fundamental message is what you were articulating earlier, Sean, about like the joy of hobbyism, you know, as like a real thing beyond just like the capitalist side of it. And so Mr. Rowell has this speech where he says, and I have it all here because I wanted to bring it up on the show, where he says, building and battling Gunpla is merely a hobby. Unlike the Mobile Suit Gundam story, we're not in a state of war, so we don't have to put our lives on the line. The fights are merely a game. You're absolutely right. But because of this, that is the most common sentence in anime. People put everything they have into their Gunpla and into their battles because they like it. They can take it seriously. And that's sort of the idea of the show. And it's a beautiful idea. And the low stakes is a feature, not a bug. The low stakes is what gives this show meaning the way the high stakes gives 00 Gundam meaning, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know about you, Sean, but I really related to that speech. And I had to write it down because that's my exact thoughts on why we do this podcast.
Yes.
You know?
I thought the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, like, we do this podcast, and we put a lot of work into it, and we love it, and, I mean, we've been doing it every week for the main show 10 years. Now, Weekly Suit Gundam, we're going on 3. You know, it's crazy. We're coming up on 40 episodes of Weekly Suit Gundam, and you know, I think we put more and more work into it the more we do, and it's because nothing is writing on it. It's because no one is telling us to do it. We don't have like a sponsor who needs us to make an episode on something so we can sell you a Casper mattress. It's not a job where like something relies on that. I feel a lot more passionate about this than I do some other stuff in my professional life, which I am passionate about. I care about my work. You care about your work. Like, we're passionate about that. But I do feel a different kind of passion about this because it is a hobby and because there's nothing driving me on it but my love for it, and that is something you need to be alive, right? You just need it to live a good life.
And it's very much fundamentally what the show is about because they repeat that sentiment multiple times over the course of the show. And they specifically, they constantly come back to that line because it becomes a sort of like catchphrase for Reiji in a way. It's like, it's because it's a game is why you can take it seriously, right? Because it's not something you have to take seriously. The fact that you are taking it seriously in some ways has more meaning because it's something you have chosen for yourself, not something that has been forced upon you in the way that, you know, being the Gundam pilot is a thing that is forced upon the protagonist of every Gundam show. It's never something that, you know, they want to do. It's always something that they have no choice but to do it, and it fucks up their life forever, right? And there's something about this message of saying it's like, but in the real world, you know, most people fortunately aren't in circumstances where that needs to be the case, where it's like you do have the freedom and the leeway to choose what you care about and what you want to spend your time and life and energy on. And it being very much about this message of, and you should find that thing and pour yourself into that thing because that is what can fulfill you. It doesn't have to be your job or your profession or your career. It doesn't have to be the thing that you are staking your life on in the way that you are staking your life on what your job is, because that's how you fucking paid money to get fucking food and shit like that to live. It is something you choose to do because you want to do it. And it's such a like really positive, life affirming message that is reflected in the way the show's, it's not just what the show is saying, it is what the show itself is. And I think that's why it's so important that the character drama is so low stakes. It's so simple, you know, like even the most like significant character drama in the show is probably Reiji and Isla and that whole dynamic. And at the end of that, it's like the most simple thing. It's just like, yeah, fuck this guy. Just stop. Like you can find another way to do this. You shouldn't be allowed to be forced to do something you don't want to do. And it's maybe, you know, in the real world, there are more complex like situations with something like that. But in the worldview of Gundam Build Fighters, it's like the show needs to have this like love of things that allows that to be a low stakes drama that is resolved somewhat simply because it has to be a thing where you can see that you do have these options in front of you and you don't have to do what other people are telling you to do, and then you move past that drama. And that's the highest it gets. Most of like the character dynamics, like with Fellini and Mao and Niels Nielsen, they're like super low stakes. There's no like big dramatic evil turn. The antagonist of the whole show is this like buffoon.
The antagonist of this show is like Team Rocket. Like that's the level
Yes.
he's working at, right? Like he is someone who fundamentally poses no real threat.
Except for it's even less than Team Rocket, because Team Rocket's trying to steal your fucking pet. This dude's just trying to make you so you don't win this like game. That's
Right.
it. Like,
Right,
he's not even trying
exactly.
to take your property or anything.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, it is so fun, and I think because it's Gunpla, and in this world, they are able to scale it from what people actually do with Gunpla in the real world, which is just build them and play with them, right, or show them and display them. But then you also have the whole fighting element that is to the fiction of this show. They're also able to present that thing that a lot of sports animes do this, and they do it great, where it's like the level of your hobby doesn't matter. It's just that like you love it and you do it. So, you know, like Sheena is also super into Gunpla, but she doesn't like fighting them, but she likes building her bear guy because that's super fun and it brings her closer to Sei, and it's something they bond over. And I love that like Isla, after she is able to get away, is when she's able to start enjoying what Gunpla is really about, and she builds her Miss Sazabi, which is
Awesome.
that is the best name of a fucking mobile suit in the show. The bear guy is great, but Miss Sazabi is mwah. I want the arcade game. It's Miss Pac-Man, but it's Miss Sazabi. Oh man. But what was I trying to say here? Just that again, like I said, that kind of scalar level of hobbyism of, you know, whether you're going pro with it, like, you know, Sei and Reiji are, or whether you're just sort of hanging out one night and you're building a Gunpla because you need to hang out and make something cool. It definitely does have meaning on that. And, of course, one of the larger themes of the show then is also about how hobbies bring people together, right? Mm-hmm. And Sei becomes a fuller person at the end of this show than he was at the beginning because he followed his hobby and it brought him to other people who are like him and enjoy his things, and he has a whole lot of friends now. And, again, I connect that to this podcast. This is how you and I have basically expressed our friendship for 10 years now.
Yeah.
But I've also met lots of cool people online and hear from listeners, and I love that side of it, you know?
Yeah, it brings people together and like you grow through those interactions. Yeah, it's a really great message. And while we're talking about like Sei and Neji as kind of our co-protagonists, I do want to shout out the two voice actors here. So Sei is voiced by Komatsu Mikako, who I know as she's God, what's the name of the character? I think it's Tosatsu, or I think that's maybe slightly off, but it's the character from Origairu, the boy, because she's like both of these actresses like mostly voice kind of either like young boys or they're kind of off in that range. Totsuka, that's the name of the character I'm thinking of from Origairu, which is a show I really like. And then you have, I think the interesting one is Kokodu Sachi, who is the voice of Deiji, who she is not in a lot of stuff. There's a couple of bigger roles she has. Probably her biggest thing is, I haven't watched this show, but I know it's pretty popular. She's a character, and she's Arthur from Seven Deadly Sins, which that seems to be a pretty big character because it's listed like 5 times on her credits because of different seasons and stuff of that show. And then she is often cast as like the young boy version of a full male character, because there's like multiple ones I recognize on here. The biggest one would be Bakugo, one of the main characters from My Hero Academia, that she's not the voice of Bakugo normally, but in flashbacks in that show when he's a little kid, she plays the little kid version of him, because she has that really good kind of like punk little boy voice that she is a little bit older with Reiji. Most of the ones she voices that I've seen are much younger kids.
She's so good at it, I have to say, fooled me. I thought Reiji was a guy doing the voice. Like, Sei, I could totally tell was a woman doing a boy's voice. Like, now that I think about it, I can tell. But Reiji it's a very seamless, like, slightly older, like, preteen boy punk voice. I love it. It's such a good performance.
Yeah, and I do love that between the two main characters, Dinko, Sei's mom, China, Isla, and then Mao, there are like long stretches of the show where it's just women. Like even if the two main characters are boys, like it's like you had got Nielsen is a guy, obviously Raul is a guy, Meijin Kawaguchi is a guy, but like so many of the characters are voiced by women. You have long scenes, they're just them. And I always love any of these kinds of shows that I love imagining like having to play like the young boy with your like young girl love interest, and what that like dynamic must feel like in the studio must be kind of weird. I don't know. It just always feels like it's like I'm trying to be a boy, but it's like of a girl. There's like this whole like hetero thing, and it's like this is like really weird, and it's like it's fun to imagine what those recording sessions have to be like when you're doing your whole like weird like little kid flirting, and you're both adult women.
But it is a great voice cast. I mean, so Sei and Reiji we love. Reiji is such a funny character. Like, overall, I think Gundam Build Fighters is the funniest Gundam show, right? Like,
yes, it is the one that is like most intentionally a comedy. Like the show it's an action comedy, right? It's like action comedy, sports anime. It is like I think it is like raucously funny. I laugh out loud basically every episode because there's some fucking ridiculous joke.
Absolutely, I do every episode, and Reiji is often the source of laughs. I think that's a really good threading of having a main character who is also very funny in his own right, which is often hard to pull off. And some of that is that Sei gets to be the straight man in some situations, but I also think Sei is funny, and his reactions to things are funny. Like, I don't think anyone gets out of this show not generating a good belly laugh at some point, and that's a pretty big win. But all the stuff with Reiji and food and all of his interactions with Ayla/Aina, he's just consistently such a joyful character to watch, and I think was definitely in those first couple episodes the things that like pulled me in most was just Reiji is such a like vibrant character, which helps because he is, like you say, the kind of outsider character who is also there as the stand-in for people who maybe don't know Gundam.
Yeah, because he's the character that you filter all the like absurdity of the world through him, and I think that's part of like the great dynamics is like you have a way is other than the fact that it's heightened because it's like Gunpla and Gundam fights, build fights and stuff like that. We can't fight them in the real world, but a lot of like the zaniness of Sei's world is not that different than like just a normal kind of high otaku kind of Gundam thing, right? It's like the jokes that we make on the podcast and shit like that. It's referential humor. It's how like deeply invested you are in something that is fundamentally trivial, the whole hobbyist thing and all that. And a lot of those jokes are like not actually that exaggerated. It is kind of the jokes that Gundam fans will make with each other. And Neji is a character that you can kind of filter that through and enjoy the like how absurd it is, like them reciting whole lines of dialogue and the ridiculous quotes that Raul-san is constantly talking through and stuff like that. All gets filtered through characters like Reiji, and then China is the other one that has a lot of that. Like she's very much the straight like woman, I guess, of the show that like is just constantly bouncing off of Raul-san in very hilarious ways. But then on the flip side, Neji is also the most ridiculous character in the show because he is a prince from another fucking dimension.
Yes.
And that's the thing that they thoroughly establish in the second episode of the series. It's not a secret. I mean, you basically know that that's more or less the dynamic in the first episode, but they definitively establish it in the second episode. It's just that nobody else fucking believes him.
Well, because here's how they do it. I love how they handle the whole Aryan or whatever the name of the Ariat, whatever the name of the dimension is so well. Because in that second episode, Sei is like, okay, tell me who the fuck you are, disappearing Reiji boy. And Reiji says, just gives him this totally honest, depiction of I was a prince, I fell into this thing, now I'm here. And it's accompanied by ridiculous music and like crayon drawings of Reiji playing around in the world. And what I love is that there's two jokes you can do with that scene. There's the easy joke that gets you one scene of laughs, which is Reiji is making it up and he's a liar. And that's what Sei thinks. And that's what everyone thinks, right? That Reiji is just goofing with them. And that's one joke you can do. Or you can make the joke that he's telling the truth and string it through 25 episodes until at the very end you see him in like the palace and now Ayla is there with him. Mm-hmm. That is fucking funny. Like I love their commitment to that bit of, I guess you're not 100% sure what the fuck is up with Reiji, but I love that as you go along you find out, no, this is not a deceitful person. He told Sei straight up, I'm a prince from another dimension, and he just is a prince from another dimension. He's just a prince he's a kid, so he doesn't give a shit about, like, getting back or, like, his princely duties or anything. He just wants to hang out in this world and eat meat buns and hang out with his friends and fight Gunpla because it's fun. And that is the funniest way they could handle that character, and it's great.
Yeah, and so informs who he is as a person in a way that's really interesting, because it's a constant thing he does of him talking about, like, I need to do this because if I back down or whatever, it'll dishonor my family name. That is clear that, like, he comes from a world that, like, probably is dealing with stuff that's, like, more serious than modern day Japan, with people running around making gunpla figures and shit like that. And he kind of, you feel the sense that he comes from this almost like Shakespearean kind of heightened royalty kind of thing. And he's talking about family honor and all that kind of stuff. But in many ways, that's like why the Gundam stuff is so attractive to him, because it is this, like, he's such a skilled fighter. He was probably trained by like some ancient sword master or some horse shit in his palace of flowers or whatever in his alternate magic dimension he comes from. And so he has this like traditional like military prince kind of whole aesthetic to him, and he kind of pours all that into this silly trivial like combat game or whatever with these plastic figures. And that's like what informs him as a character, and that dynamic is so rich that he has this fundamental seriousness of him that is like, feels like it is in a dramatic sense way more serious than other people, but it comes from a background that is so antithetical to the world that the show is set in, that you see and interact with on an episode by episode basis, that it is funny in its own right while earnestly informing who he is as a character.
Absolutely. And I also love that we never go to the other dimension. Like, it's never a big piece of, like, they never spend a bunch of time doing the lore. When Reiji goes back at the end, there's one scene where we see a little bit of background, but otherwise it's completely about what actually matters, which is him and Isla in that last scene, right? The most we get is the lore behind the chairman, who was a thief who came to this world, the Plavsky particle came with him, and he starts to exploit it. But that's it. Like, the other world is important because it's where Reiji comes from, and it's where the Plavsky particle comes from. And it doesn't, like, the show is very good about knowing what this story actually needs and what it doesn't. And it doesn't need, like, a big info dump at some point about, like, the society of this other dimension and where Reiji comes from. You can just do it through the characters and then have a little bit at the end. And I love that sense of focus, too. Because I think, I have to imagine, if this show ran any longer than it actually does, you would be tempted to, like, do the lore dump on it. And I don't care.
Yeah.
It's not what's important.
It's very easy to imagine the show having like a very bad middle season arc about like the maid he has from the other world, like teleporting here also, and like taking him back, and then Reiji has to fight his way back, and you see that whole side of it. And that could be like an interesting show in its own right, but it would so bog down what Gundam Build Fighters is, and it's that sort of lightness on its feet that makes the show so fun, that you can imagine that there's a whole other world out there in this crazy area dimension or whatever. But it's, as you say, it's not important fundamentally for what this show is about, because all that's important with that is Reiji and who he is as a person, and you learn that through what he says and what he does.
And again, Reiji is funnier because we don't know all that, and it is abstracted, and the most in-depth look we get at that dimension is through crayon children's drawings over silly music. That's fucking great. That is a commitment to the bit that I love.
Yeah, and then when you do finally see that in episode 25, you get the one shot, like, it kind of looks like those crayon drawings, right? It's, like, covered in these, like, very beautiful,
yes,
like, pastel flowers with, like, bright oranges and pinks everywhere. And I like that it you know, Reiji's, you know, a little bit off on his artistic skills, but he was trying to represent the right thing with his crayon drawings.
Absolutely. Okay, so we talked about Reiji. We've talked about, is there anything else you want to say about Sei before we move on to some side characters? Because I think I just want to break down some of the characters now.
Yeah, I mean, all I'll say about Sei is I love him, that little dorky, little goofy boy. I mean, it's just, he's so, like, the heart of the show that it's, I guess we'll get into it when we talk about the ending, but I feel like the ending hits really hard because he's this, like, precious little kid, and you see how much he has grown as a person over the course of the show. That is, like, really what the show's, like, where its true heart lies. And it's just very effective. Like, you just fall in love with the kid immediately. I don't know how you couldn't.
No, he's great. He's perfect. When he does, late in the series, he gets hypnotized and starts reciting Amuro's dialogue, and Mao is like, he's on episode 9! That is maybe the hardest I laughed at the whole show. It's very funny.
Yeah, that's definitely, like, top 3 jokes in the show easily for me. And particularly, I think my favorite moment is when he does all the episode 9 stuff, and then Niels and them are starting to talk, and you see hear more dialogue in the background. He's just like, Machilda-san, and stuff like this.
Yes.
And then it cuts back to him, and he's just doing the salute with this like Amuro-looking expression on his face with his eyes closed. That's the punchline that hit me super hard on that joke.
So good. All right. Say's mom, as I said, has got it going on.
Yeah.
I want my cover of the song Stacy's Mom, but it's Say's mom. Because she is great. She is. Someone asked me on Twitter a couple weeks ago, like, what woman in Gundam do you have the biggest crush on? And I really didn't have an answer because they're mostly teenagers.
Easily
it's Say's mom. Yeah,
oh, yeah,
it's Say's mom. Say's mom. Absolutely. I will. Yeah, she's great. I love Say's mom.
Yeah, it's so this is the 4th character we've talked about on this show, played by Koto Mitsuishi now. So she's Misato in Eva, both the original TV show and the movie. So we just talked about her basically last episode of Weekly Suit Gundam, or Weekly Genesis Evangelion, I guess. She's also Tanya in Afterward Gundam X, and they use this in this show for a brief scene. She is also Ramius in Gundam Seed.
Right. Yes.
But this is one, and then, like, you know, I always have to mention it because it would be absurd not to mention it. She's fucking Sailor Moon in Sailor Moon. You know, it would be like talking about a show that Masako Nozawa shows up and not mentioning, oh, and by the way, she's Goku. It's like, it's fucking Sailor Moon. And so she's like a great, like, legendary voice actress. This is my favorite role she's done. Like, this character is so fun and so full of life. And there's something, like, I think it's like the mark of the show, that, like, it spends, like, so much love and energy on the main character's mom. And, like, she's this very active presence in the show. And it's not, she doesn't have, like, a big character arc. There's not, like, a big dramatic thing connected to her. Like, she's just a pretty active presence in the show, similarly to China. And I feel like I really love their pairing, and a lot of that early stuff of her trying to hook her son up with China and, like,
so
peeking
adorable
through the door and all that stuff. And it's just, yeah, she's just this very, like, attractive character in the sense of that she's so happy and funny, and she cares so much about her kid. It's just, she's awesome. Like, I don't even know what else to say about it. It's just the character jumps off of the, like, screen so powerfully. It is just so vibrant. She's just great.
She's probably the best version of the cool mom archetype I think I've ever seen in anything. Because she gets to be a cool mom, but that means she's also kind of a dork, and I love that she's just kind of a dork sometimes. She's trying to get Sheena and her son together. She's, you know, she'll embarrass him a couple of times. She also has, like, the mom kind of overreactions. It's not really even an overreaction, but when she comes to their room and Aina is staying there, and it's just like, and I just love that Sei answers the door, and then Isla comes out in a bathrobe, and it's just that immediate, like, what the fuck? And it's just, you know where it's going, but it is so much fun. She's a great character through the whole show. It's a great character design. It's a great vocal performance. I love her whole, you know, interplay with Sei. It just feels very, like, lived in. Like, you can feel the life these people have lived and will live through that character. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think it's really critical that she personally is not particularly into the Gunpla stuff, right? Like, she's vaguely familiar with it because she's married to the guy who's the runner-up of, like, the previous world tournament or whatever, and she basically runs the shop. I mean, Sei clearly is the guy he makes all the models. When people have questions, she's just like, hey, Sei, can you come down here? I love some of those early seasons, like, hey, can you come down here and answer this question about what the fuck this shit is? Because I don't know. Like, I don't know what an Ak guy is. What's that? But she's never dismissive of it anyway, right? She's not a part of that world, but she understands, like, why they love it, right? It's like she understands the value and the importance of that hobby, and never, like, dismisses it or shuts it down in any way. But she's also not participant in it. Like, there, you know, she's not. You don't have in that big. I think it's like episode 22 or 23, where you have the big montage of the Gundam Fair before the last, like, fight, and all the characters are making their new Gunpla, and that's where, like, Miss Sazabi comes in. She's not making her own Gunpla, right? Because it's just, like, she's an adult woman, she's not into it, whatever. Like, she's lived a whole life, she's married and has a 14-year-old son. I think she probably knows what her interests are. And I just love that the show lets that be what it is with that character. As you say, it's very lived in, and it feels very real. It's just such a natural extension of the show. And so often in series like this, the parent characters are either, like, they're barely present, or they're just like mysteriously absent and nobody ever comments on the fact that it's like do they ever mention why Yugi has a grandpa but where the fuck his mom and dad is? Like, is that ever addressed?
Yugi does have a mom. In the manga, Yugi's mom appears several times, but she is such a minor character, she never appears in animation. So that's why most people don't think Yugi has a mom, because it is so minor, they cut it from the adaptation.
Yeah, and that's like super common in this kind of series, is to just like, I don't know, the parents just don't exist. And it's fine because, you know, you have to like, you know, make your choices on where you want to spend your energy with your characters. But there is something that it always feels better to me, that if you can find a natural space to do it, you need to address the parents, because if you're a kid, like, your parents are a massive, massive, massive part of your life and who you are. And relationship to them is very important. And so finding the space to like have Say's parents be like really in big parts of the show, I think is really important to what the show is doing.
Yeah, if you have a parent on this kind of show, it's almost always the grandpa Yugi archetype of it's the person who's like super into the thing and like gives you exposition and lore. And instead they give that to Mr. Ral, and then, you know, Say's mom just gets to be his mom and her own person. And that's great. Yeah. And I love it. Should we talk about Say? Yes, I love her too. Should we talk about...
I don't want to make it weird, but you just have to say it.
Yeah, she's great. Should we talk about Say's dad while we're here and finish the Iori family?
Yeah, so good old Takashi Iori. Now, Jonathan, do you know what I meant when on the previous week's Stuff podcast episode, when we had a listener question that asked, if you could play a character in Gundam, what character would you be? And I said I would be Takashi Iori because, yeah.
You would be the guy who abandons his wife and child to go around the world. I mean, here's the question. Is he a deadbeat dad? Because I kind of think he's a deadbeat dad, but he's so lovable you can't hate him for it.
I don't know if I wouldn't say deadbeat, because his job is he's an international Gunpla battle referee, right? So his job, he's just like, for his job, he has to travel a lot. Like, he's...
But he's also an idiot who comes back to Japan in the middle of the tournament, goes to the shop, finds that his wife isn't there, and just sits there eating ramen for a couple of days until it finally occurs to him watching TV, maybe they're at the tournament my son is participating in, maybe I should go cheer him on. It is one of the funniest scenes in the show, but also, he's kind of a piece of shit.
You know, it's that kind of thing where you're just so into whatever your hobby is that you might be a little, like, scatterbrained on other facets of your life.
No, it is, I mean, yeah, like, I can make jokes about it, but I love him. I love that there is this sense that even if he's not always around, he and Say have this really tight bond. Like, there's episode 16, which is definitely a contender for my favorite episode of this show. I think maybe that or, like, the final two. But episode 16 is the one where you meet Takeshi Iori for the first time. And that's the one where Reiji goes off, and it's like, this is the closest we get to Reiji and Say having like a falling out, is just that Say wants to build his Gunpla and doesn't want Reiji to touch it, and so Reiji goes out and goes to the model shop, and Takeshi Iori is there in a beard and disguise.
Yeah,
and
he just basically looks like a classic movie hobo, which is great. And he's just like hanging out in a Gunpla store.
And he gets Reiji and Aina in a room together and teaches them how to build Gunpla, which is where you get the fullest like tutorial on Gunpla in the show. Like, he's like, always make 2 cuts, you know, that kind of thing. And I just love that whole one. And I also love that the ending of it is Say realizing his dad was around, and there isn't like this big bitterness and conflict over his dad not coming to see him. It's just this sense you get that, like, when they're together, they probably spend a lot of time together, and he is a good dad, and then he does have other stuff to go do, and it's just the dynamic their family has, and you could judge it, as I was saying, you could make jokes about it, but you don't judge it because the show presents it as, like, a status quo where everyone is satisfied.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I really love the ending of that episode where Reiji shows him the nippers or whatever, and Say's like, but those nippers, those are, and then he pauses for a second, and he's just like, what are you talking about? It's like, oh no, it's nothing, and he smiles, and then he looks, you know, later, he's like out on the balcony or whatever, he looks up and he like says, it's like, hey dad, you were there or whatever. And yeah, you get the sense that they have this very warm relationship, but also there's like this trust, right, that like, because Say is also, you know, he's 14 or 15 years old, like he's growing up. And so there's this like there's this implicit like loving trust, I think, between the two characters. And I think it is interesting that he and his dad barely interact in the whole show because Takashi's not like super present. He's there in that like episode 16, then he pops up near the end of the series a little bit. But like the most direct interaction they have that's like dialogue, that's not them like in the montage in episode 23 where they meet, but it's just in a big montage, there's no dialogue, is in the last episode when Takashi shoots the big cannon to kind of open up the path for, say, Neji to go destroy the crystal, and Takashi says, like, go on, you know, so, like, say you can do it, and that's it, but you still get that whole feeling that there is, like, this whole family dynamic that exists underneath those characters. You just don't need it to be spelled out for you as an audience.
Absolutely. Okay, so the other characters kind of in their family circle, we have China, we have Insho, the class rep is
yes.
what Sei always calls her, the most adorable romance in all of Gundam.
Yes.
It's what Frau and Amuro should have had if Amuro wasn't a weirdo and they didn't have to go fight in a war.
Yeah, it's like one of like the most charming, heartwarming, like middle schoolers having a romance. Like it's the most realistic, like two naive, like 14-year-olds dating I've ever seen in a show,
yes.
right? Like it's just this very wholesome, they're very awkward. They don't clearly have like any idea like what a like romantic relationship is in that kind of more like intimate sense. It's just like they really like each other and they have a crush on each other and it's mutual. And that's it. And I just love the way that they play that relationship in this very like sort of quiet, subtle way, and they're just kind of there for each other throughout the whole show. China's voiced by Ishikawa Yui, who I talked about very recently on Weekly Stuff podcast, because she is the voice of Violet Evergarden in Violet Evergarden, and she's also the voice of 2B in Nier Automata. This is a very different kind of performance from
I
those
would not have
characters.
recognized that. Yeah,
I would not have known if I hadn't looked it up, because she plays a lot of more kind of like severe, kind of like stoic characters like a 2B, and this is more like a cute little like, you know, like class representative librarian kind of like bookie girl. But yeah, she does a great job. China's role as the sort of straight woman in a lot of the comic routines I love, because I think maybe my favorite joke in the whole series is the exchange she has with Ramba Rao in the car, where she asks him how old he is and Rao says that he's 35 years old, and there's like this perfectly timed comic beat, and then her glasses go like in, you know, like turn white or whatever, like Gendo in Neon Genesis Evangelion. You can't see her expression. She just goes, huh? He says, what, is something wrong? No, I think that's very lovely, is basically what she says. Then it cuts away, and that might be the hardest I've ever laughed, like mostly because like the joke itself is very funny, because Ramba Rao in the like the official fiction of Mobile Suit Gundam, that dude is supposed to be 35 years old. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense, but that's what it's supposed to be. But then China's like reaction, which she has a couple of jokes like that throughout the series, where she just has this very sort of flat reaction to some absurd nonsense that's just been said. She plays off of those incredibly well.
I'm laughing very hard because I'm just remembering that scene, and
Yeah.
it is one of the best jokes in the show, 100%. It's so good. So let's talk about him. Let's talk about Mr. Rao,
Yeah.
the masterstroke of this fucking series. I mean, Sean, what I would give to be a fly on the wall in like the writer's room where they came up with this idea of like, what if we had a character we need a character for Gundam Build Fighters who is like the old Gundam fan. He knows Gundam. He can give a lot of exposition while the characters are fighting. You need that character. Like, he's kind of the Grandpa Yugi of this show, right?
Yes, yeah.
We need that kind of character. Who should he be? Should Sei have a grandpa? Should it be Sei's dad? And then someone says, what if there's a guy who just has decided that he has built his entire personality around emulating Ramba Rao from the original Mobile Suit Gundam? And everyone's like, that's a great idea. And then someone said, could we get Masashi Hirose to do it? Could we get him to voice Mr. Rao? And they're like, oh my god. And they do it. And it is so fucking good. It never gets old. It is the source of a million great jokes, including him being buried in the sand under a Zaku sand armor, which someone else had to build for him, which is my favorite thing about that joke. What a fucking brilliant idea this character is.
Yeah, and I think I have a slightly different read on the character, because my read on like what that conversation was like, they had this Grandpa Yugi character, what is it? And someone just said, well, what if it's just Ramba Rao? And they're like, well, do you mean like someone who's obsessed with Ramba Rao and is kind of modeling? No, what if it's just Ramba Ral? What if Ramba Ral just is that character? Because I don't think it's some dude who's obsessed with, right? Because nobody ever mentions in the show, nobody comments on the fact that this guy is just Ramba Ral. He's just Ramba Ral. And in the last episode, when they're in the audience, Takashi Iori turns to him and just calls him Ramba. He's not Ralsan. He's literally Ramba fucking Ral, and that's it. And he's voiced by Masashi Hirose, who's the voice of Ramba Ral in the Mobile Suit Gundam, as well as he played a bunch of one-off characters in Afterwar Gundam X and stuff like that. But yeah, I the character to me is this incredible, as you say, stroke of genius, where the fact that his existence is not something that is commented on or remarked on by the show, puts him in this insane position of a character, right? Because you have other characters that cosplay as different figures of friend Gundam. It's a pretty common thing the show does of hey, here's this random dude in a Gundam X in one scene in a tournament, and it cuts to the cockpit and he's dressed like Jamil Neat. But it's always someone that's dressed like Jamil Neat. It's not just Jamil Neat. This motherfucker is just Ramba Ral, and that's it.
So my interpretation, and this was basically because of the episode where Reiji meets Mr. Fellini in that bar where Ramba Ral goes, and then there's all the other people pretending to be Zeon soldiers, and so I just thought this is a club he's been a part of for all his life, and he pretends to be Mr. Ral. Your read is that at the moment Ramba Ral dies in Mobile Suit Gundam, he actually falls through a portal to our world and decides to just live out his days as a guy playing Gunpla.
So I guess here's the point where I should just explain. This is my mental explanation for what Gundam Build Fighters is. Gundam Build Fighters to me, and eventually I'll make a 5-hour-long YouTube video that's just called The Ending of Gundam Build Fighters Explained or whatever on YouTube, or 13 things you didn't know about Gundam Build Fighters. But to me, Gundam Build Fighters is a show that is set in Gundam Heaven. This show takes place, this is where Gundam characters go when they die. And my evidence for this is threefold. One is that the show itself is the ideal version of the Gundam world, right? Where you get to enjoy Gundam without it ruining everything about your life, right? It's not about war, it's not about trauma, but you get to have they're not technically giant robots, but they feel like giant robots when you're playing the game. And you get to have them and fight them and have fun with it, and that's it. And it's just about fun and loving technology and all this stuff and having a good time with it. My other piece of evidence is Ramba Ral in the show is just Ramba Ral. Nobody comments on the fact. He doesn't have a past or a history that's divergent from Ramba Ral. People call him the lieutenant. He's the blue giant. He's the pilot of the goof. This dude is just Ramba fucking Ral. And then my real evidence is episode 23, which is the big fair episode, where before the last battle of the tournament, there's a long montage. And in that montage, you see characters throughout the history of Gundam from almost every Gundam show that they are typically characters that have died really tragic deaths, and they are there together, and it's usually pairs of characters having fun making Gunpla. And you see Kai and Miharu from the original Gundam are there, and they're making Gunpla. There's Haman Karn and Char, and they're making a Gunpla. Uso is there with his mom and dad, and they're having a fun time making a Gunpla. And it's just there's dozens of characters in the backgrounds of those shots that are characters from other Gundam shows that have died tragic deaths, and a lot of them are romantic or family pairs, and they're just happy in a way you have never seen Gundam characters get to be happy making Gunpla. And that leads me to believe that Gundam Build Fighters is set in Gundam Heaven, and that Reiji is an angel, and that's what the other dimension is that's a higher plane of heaven where divine beings are, but this is where mortal souls go when they die and just get to have a good time. That is my grand theory of what Gundam Build Fighters is.
Gun to my fucking head, I would not have guessed this is where this was going. This is my new favorite moment in the history of our podcast, where Sean just lays out the most insane fan theory I've ever heard. It is convincing, though, because I noticed all the characters around, and I just assumed it was very good cosplay. But okay, you're laying down that this is Gundam Heaven. This really does feel, Sean, like a video you should make on YouTube called You Won't Believe Gundam Build Fighters Fan Theory. Gundam Build Fighters Fan Theory blows the doors off the franchise. Yeah.
Yes, very much. But so, obviously I'm mostly joking, not entirely joking about that Gundam Heaven thing. Because I do think there is something about it that it does just sort of feel that way. The way that, like, this is where people get to have fun with Gundam and you have all the goofy Gundam characters there. But it is like I have to legitimately say, I just don't read the Ramba Rao character as anything other than that. This dude's just Ramba Rao. Like, I can't, like, he's never been younger than this, right? Like, this character just existed, and he has his fucking, like, blue sweater with, like, the pink cardigan he has wrapped around his neck, which is the funniest fucking costume to give this old dude who's Ramba Rao. But he just exists fully shaped and fully formed in this world as this bizarre anomaly that he is just that character, Ramba Rao. And he is the best character in the show, and it is just, like, unbridled, insane genius, the idea to have this character exist. I don't know how high they had to have been in the meeting, like what was going on, what they put in the fucking coffee before they went to the meeting room to have this idea. But the fact that they do it and they play it totally straight, and I think the reason why it works is because nobody commented on it, right? Say never finds it weird that there is a guy that has committed, in your reading, Jonathan, so fully to the bit that he has changed his fucking name to be Ramba Rao, and he has the facial hair, and he only ever pilots Goose and all that thing, and he never says, it's like, man, you sure are like that character from Mobile Suit Gundam, huh? You must really like Ramba Rao. Nobody says anything like that to him. He's just Ralsan.
It's pretty perfect, and we also have to shout out the wonderful Masashi Hirose. It is a magnificent performance, because it's such a great turn in that it sounds like Ramba Rao. Like, I recognized it when he started talking, like, did they get the... I mean, he sounds much older, because he was when he recorded this, and I think that is part of why it works also, as he leans into the age a little bit. But it's Ramba Rao. You can hear it, but it's also such a funny version of it, and, like, his comic timing is off the charts. And there is something sad. This is the last full role he voiced. He's still alive, but I guess we'll talk about this more with Build Fighters Try, but yes, he retires for illness-related reasons we don't know, and is replaced. That's also why you do not hear him in Gundam The Origin. There's a different person doing Ramba Rao in that. But man, as a swan song, it doesn't get much better than this. It's a great performance.
Yeah, and you can just feel how much fun he's having with it, because he just gets so many of the best scenes in the show, because he gets to occupy that position you need of the character, that when there's, like, a fight going on, it cuts to him, or, like, it'll cut to a character that'll say some ridiculous, and this is why, by you channeling the Plavsky particles in this way, like, we'll, like, destroy the Build Strike in a second. And then it cuts to Rao, and even though he couldn't have possibly have heard what this character across the room said, he says, that's not true, because actually the absorb shield will blah, 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 right? And he gets to give the big speech, and then he'll, like, throw in some sort of, like, reference to a Gundam quote in there at the end, as he always does. It's great. Like, every line of dialogue he has as a character is so funny, whether it's the, like, everything comes down and he's just like a goofy old man who has a crush on Say's mom, or he's, like, battle hardened, like, taking everything 110% super serious about, like, and delivering some hard wisdom about the nature of model building and shit like that. Like, the whole spectrum of the character is so perfectly portrayed.
I think my favorite moment when he does a Ramba Rao line is when he's trying to come to the tournament and he wakes up late and he's running to the bus stop going, Ramba Rao forgot to fight in the middle of a fight.
Yes.
I died. I fucking died. It's so good.
Yes, because they always wait for, like, the best possible place to drop the quotes. Yes. And that's probably the most inventive one, because it is a really, like, it's a very Tomino-ass line from the original Gundam when he says that, like, today, Ramba Rao forgot what a fight was in the middle of a fight, or ever, like, you translate and phrase it in English, and just throwing that in that moment, very fucking good.
I love it. I love it so much. Okay. There are a bajillion characters on this show. I don't think we can do a deep dive on all of them, unless we want to do another EVA-length podcast. But who would you like to talk about? Who's your... let me start here. I want to ask, outside of that main circle, who's your favorite character in this show?
Fellini.
Okay.
Outside of the ones that we just talked about, Fellini is probably, like, the other one. Either him or Isla, because Isla's probably, like, a more important character on the show, but Fellini... we get Mr. Bushido himself, Nakamura Yuichi, coming back very quickly to Gundam, and playing Fellini. Because Fellini, I think, is the other character who has a bunch of like the best jokes. Because I think my top 3 favorite jokes in the show are definitely it's the "I'm 35 years old" what scene. It's Ray or Sei's whole like having to quote the whole like all 43 episodes of Gundam because he's been hypnotized. That whole sequence is fucking hilarious. The other one is pretty early on. There's a scene where there's this like very attractive woman sitting at like an outdoor cafe, and then the like waiter comes over with a platter that has he's got what is it? I think it's the X Gundam on it, or no, he's got the V Gundam, the original V Gundam from Victory Gundam, not the V2, and he puts it down. And he says, "Your Gunpla, madam, like this is what you ordered." And he says like, "I didn't order this." And he says, "It's compliments of the gentleman down there." He points and it cuts. And you see Fellini sitting there with like sunglasses on, and then he comes over and says, "I made this Gunpla for you because I thought only the V Gundam is the most beautiful and elegant and exquisite but simple design that expresses your elegance and beauty." And she's very taken by this romantic gesture of someone sending her a fucking Gunpla like it's like this like expensive wine. And then he gets a phone call from Reiji or someone, and on the phone he's like, "You can't interrupt me right now. I just spent hours building this Gunpla trying to pick up women." And the lady overhears it and like throws her drink in his face. That whole sequence, just the thought of the like James Bond-esque thing of ordering like this champagne or something and sending it to this woman, but it's a fucking very beautiful Gunpla of the V Gundam from Victory Gundam, is so unbelievably funny. And Fellini has a bunch of moments like that, like when he gets drunk at the party and shit like that, that I just find hugely funny.
Yes, Fellini would be my runner-up for this answer. I'll tell you my answer in a second, but let's stick on Fellini, the Italian dandy himself.
Yes.
I mean, I love how the actor mixes in little pieces of Italian here and there. It's great. I also think his Gundam, the Wing Gundam Fenice, is my favorite of the custom Gundams. That's the one that I want to build, the bear guy, but I also want specifically the Wing Gundam Fenice something or other that he has in the final episode that is the final upgrade is so good. It's another Italian word he puts on there. But I love the green. I love like how it mixes with the original Wing Gundam design. I love all of the stuff with him fighting. I think he is maybe the best representative on the show of the ridiculous hyper reality of this world. That he is like, he's the Italian dandy. He's the guy who picks up women and everyone loves him, and he's a fucking rock star from Italy. And what he does is he builds plastic models and fights them in a video game. Like, that's essentially the reality of this world. And I fucking love it. It's so good. I love how far they push that with him. And yeah, it being that actor, it being Mr. Bushido, mwah, perfect. Love it.
Yeah, it's great. I'm with you. That Wing Gundam Fenice is my favorite Gunpla from this. It's that, or I also really love the Zaku Amazing a lot.
That's really
and obviously
good.
Bear Guy-san is up there, but yeah, and I actually like the original Wing Gundam Fenice even more than the like kind of fully revitalized version from the end, because there's something I love about the narrative you learn around it, that it's like it's his like original Gunpla that he fell in love with, and he's just been like modifying, repairing it for his like entire life, and that's why it's got this really fucked up thing where it's got like 2 different eye lens colors, like one's green, one's red, and the V on top like is kind of chipped off, and it's got this whole like battle damaged thing. But it's not because he painted it to be weathered or whatever. It's because it's legitimate. He's just been using this Gunpla for so long, and it's got the like, you know, it's got this whole asymmetrical look to it that's very cool, with the 2 wings on one side, which makes no sense, but it looks fucking sick when it's like silhouetted and it spreads out like it's a big cloak or whatever, and his 2 different colored Gundam lenses like glow red and green. It's one of the most radical redesigns in the whole show other than Bear Guy-san. And it's just a really gorgeous looking figure for a very cool character. And then I also have now remembered one of my other favorite jokes with Fellini is it's a very early appearance of the character is when, you know, they have the whole early dynamic of he's the one who kind of trains Reiji how to be a fighter. And then there's that moment where the like Reiji runs up, and then Fellini you later see has the same thing, and Reiji like runs up late to the fight or whatever, and he gets there and his fingers, and only his fingers, are like covered in bandages because of how much he's been playing Gunpla. And I love that it's just his fingers, because it's like an old trope that I think it dates back to at least Yu Yu Hakusho, where Hiei does that at the Dark Tournament, where he shows up really late and his whole arm is covered in fucked up bandages because he's like, I've mastered the fucking Dragon of the Darkness Flame flame or whatever, like secret technique that if I use it, it'll take my life. And it's Reiji does that, but it's just his fingers and that's it. And it's a really great visual gag.
Yes, absolutely. I also love that Fellini has the whole relationship with Kiraran, the idol, who is, I totally thought was going to be like a one-off character in that one episode with China, but then they bring her back, and she is just the idol who's like there for all of the stuff in the second half, and she's really great. And I love that she and Fellini wind up having this like really mature adult relationship by the end of the show. It's like really surprising. It's really good stuff.
Yes, yeah. Fellini's just it's just such a fun, joyful character. And yes, his relationship with Kirara is also a lot of fun.
But my favorite character is Mao. Mao makes me laugh so hard. I love that little boy to death. He is such a funny, I love the whole premise of him coming from this special school of Gunpla, which is so ridiculous because in the lore of the show, Gunpla battles have been around for, 10 years? But there's already the Shingyon school that works out of an ancient pagoda and has an ancient master who would have been like 70 when this started, and has all these. I love that whole side of it. I love how how he's so into like the building side of Gunpla, and especially that Kansai dialect. Like that is the heaviest Kansai I think I've ever heard in an anime character. Like if you've heard us talk about like Kansai dialects before, and you've been like, I've never really spotted it, you'll spot it in Gundam Build Fighters because it's very heavy. But I think it is just a great comedic performance. And then I also just genuinely think the character is part of some really good stories. So he's the first one eliminated in the final 16. And that episode is fantastic. It's a really good battle. But I also love how they play everything with... They make that Mao's story. They don't make it Sei and Reiji's. And at the end, they just have this really nice little moment of him out by the lake crying because he lost. And it's not the end of his life, but, he really wanted to win. And that's really fun. Or it's not, that moment isn't fun, but it's really good to have, I think, in this show. And then they have fun with the character after that being this kind of sad sack because Masaki-chan got freaked out when he tried to run into her arms and kiss her on their first date. And so he's just crying. She also looks
like she's like 8 years older than he is. It's like very like, I think there's a reason why it's like she's not just like making out with this like little boy. Like Mao looks like Reese to me is even younger than Sei is. Like he's like
totally
looks like he's like 12 or something.
Yeah, I think my read on the whole Masaki thing is that she's like humoring him and being his friend, not that they're actually going to go like do it or anything. That'd be a horrible crime. Masaki,
the dark and sordid. That's you just don't even. Yeah, I guess we should. Maybe now's the time to talk about the plot of Gundam Build Fighters Try. No, Gundam Build Fighters Try is not about the sordid relationship between Mao and Misaki. It's Try because there's another character involved in the relationship. But yeah.
Okay, this is getting loopy, but yes, I love Mao.
Yes, Mao's great.
I love his different mobile suits he builds. I love that it's all built around After War Gundam X. And the other best mobile suit to me that is made in this one is his one in the final episode, which is the Crossbone Mao X or whatever it is. I mean, that thing is fucking cool. Mixing a Crossbone Gundam with the Gundam X, hell yeah.
Yeah, I love with that one the way the skull on the chest it janks open. It's like it's not a smooth action. It like rips itself open and then fires his giant fuck off Mao laser.
It's great.
Yeah, no, Mao's awesome. I particularly love his relationship with Chinon, his sensei. And that whole scene in the last episode where Chinon comes in the Master Gundam. And that's where you get all the ridiculous G Gundam bullshit is incredible. And I love you have a couple of moments where you see their kind of relationship where they make really dumb goofy gunplas and then show them to each other as this haha, is my gunpla better than yours, and they're these ridiculous ones, their little kind of student pupil or student master relationship kind of thing I really love.
Totally. And that scene you're talking about when the master comes in and he fights in the G Gundam with Ramba Ral and the Goof. That is my favorite action beat in the whole show. Yes. That is they clearly saved some extra time and money to animate that scene and have Mr. Ral have his big fucking moment. It is so good, and I love that it's with the master of the Shingyon sect of Gunpla.
Yes. Yeah.
But let's talk about Ayla, because you mentioned her too. She's one of the best characters. One thing that I think is really impressive about this show is that it's a short show. It's 25 episodes. Every episode is pretty packed. But I like that they allow the Ayla thing to be a slow burn. Because Ayla and Reiji meet, And you continue that dynamic several times where they meet and there's a short little scene of them having a misunderstanding, or they're stealing each other's meat buns, which I know that sounds suggestive. They're actual meat buns.
Yeah.
Until eventually they're just becoming friends. And I really like that the show puts the time, like plants that flag really early so that by the time you get to the big Isla showcase episodes near the end, Isla's betrayal and then the one where they fight her and like help free her, you've seeded that ground really well and made it feel like an actual relationship that just evolved over a couple of weeks. It's one of the more skillful pieces of storytelling in this show, and this show is all skillful storytelling, but it's very well done.
Yeah, because they meet in episode 10 of the show, and their fight in the tournament isn't until episode 21. So, yeah it is a long build with that relationship. And, yeah, Isla's one of the strongest characters in the show. And one thing I love about her is that she's, I think, one of the best depictions of the, like, broadly speaking, the Lala Soon archetype, right? Like, Isla's kind of a mix between the cyber new type thing, like a 4 or something, and then specifically there are multiple references to Alan B. Beardsley from G Gundam, because there's obviously a lot of G Gundam DNA in this show. And so the whole, like, kind of, like, I forget what their ridiculous name is for it, but it's basically the Berserk system that she's in, like Alan
The
B.
Embody.
Beardsley. Yes, the Embody system. There's too many ridiculous, the new type NTD, new type destroyer, blah, blah, blah. There's too many of those, the Trans Am, for me to remember all of them off the top of my head anymore. But yeah, like her whole dynamic there is very much cut from that kind of cloth. But I like that they take a little bit more of the Alan B approach, where you get this, like, you get a real investment in the character and who she is and her relationship with your main character here, Reiji, so much, and it you get the sense of like who she is outside of like the confines of the cyber new type-y part of the character, which I think is can sometimes be a negative aspect of that trope, is that you never get the sense of like who these women are as people. You only ever get to see them as weapons, which is what they're designed to be by the people that have like kidnapped them. But it's sad that you never get to see the other sides of them. And of course, Gundam Build Fighters being a much lighter show, you get this sense of all her whole attitude when she's with Team Nemesis and all that stuff is entirely a put on, and she's actually like this very normal young woman who like wants to go have fun and eat good food and like meet people and just have a good time and wants to be free. And you get to see so much of that side of the character before you have the embodied system make her go crazy or whatever. And that makes that whole dynamic work so well and feel so rich. It's because you know her so well before any of that happens.
Yes, absolutely. She's great. I really love that they resolve her main arc a couple episodes before the end, so that then you have a couple episodes where she just gets to be Isla. She just gets to be herself, and she's with the group, and she's part of their friend group, and then she gets to be there in the final battle. She's there in one of my other favorite episodes, episode 23, Gunpla Eve, which is just kind of the hangout at the festival. She has a bunch of great scenes there. That's where she makes the Miss Sazabi, which is so fucking cool. It's a great character, and one that they do a really good job seeding throughout the show.
Absolutely. And she's played by another actress that we have talked about a lot in recent episodes of the show, because it's Hayami Saudi again. So it's Shinobu from Kimetsu Yaiba. It's God, I'm blanking on the character's name from Gundam Age, but the little girl with purple hair that's Flit's love interest from Gundam Age. So this is the second time she's played the cyber new type archetype. And then, of course, also she's Ayaka from Genshin Impact, if you've been playing.
That's where I recognized her from, because I hear her for about 7 hours a day. No, I'm kidding. I don't play Genshin Impact that much. But Ayaka is on my team, and she's like my main now. And so, yes, I hear that all the time. And I was like, and I knew, like, because I didn't look up the voice actors for this show. And I'm like, I know I recognize this. But yeah, I didn't put the face to it. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a great performance. It's a wonderful character. The character with the best name in this show has to be Nils Nielsen, because that's not his only name. He is also the samurai boy, and he is also the what's the other name?
Early genius.
Early genius, not boy genius. The early genius. I love it. I love Nils Nielsen. I love that his dynamic is he's basically Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, where if you've
Yes.
seen Enter the Dragon, it's Bruce Lee is doing the tournament by day, but he's actually there because he's like working with the CIA or whoever, and so at night he like does all his ninja stuff, like I know not literally a ninja, but like all the flips and stuff to get down and like investigate the different parts. There's like the scene where he is overhearing the chairman talk about Reiji is like directly a reference, I feel like, to Enter the Dragon, because he's even wearing like the karate gi, like the
Yes.
white suit. It's so funny. I love Nils Nielsen, and I like that he's nominally the character who like gets you near like the lore plot building with the Plavsky particle at the end, but he's also just a fun, silly character who has some really good fights. He has the Shogun Astray is his name.
The
Is his
Sengoku
Gundam, right?
Astray. Yeah.
Sengoku Astray. Oh my god, great Gundam. His battles with the battle he has with Sei and Reiji is one of the best in the show. Love me some Nils Nielsen.
Yes. Niels Nielsen is also the best, like, Gundam name, like, Gundam character name in the show. Of course, like, the American character gets this, like, absurd name, Niels Nielsen. And I love that the American character is this, right? He's like obsessed with like Bushido. There's the great moment where he's introduced, where you get to that whole episode where you see he has the fight with Greco, who's voiced by Kudada, the guy who voices Kiryu in the Yakuza series. And he fights him and like beats him in like one move or whatever, and it's this big upset. But you get to see the American version of a Gunpla tournament, and it's like this big ostentatious thing, like professional wrestling with this big narrated introduction of each character. And in that with Niels, you find out that like I think it's his dad is basically Sherlock Holmes. His dad is some like super detective, and his mom's like a black belt in karate and a math genius or something. And then they got together and had this kid who is the early genius, who like is both like an amazing physicist and like scientist boy, but then also he's like a world-class martial artist at the same time, which is like about the coolest and most absurd backstory you can have for a character ever.
It's so good, and my favorite piece of world building in the whole show is in the epilogue of episode 25.
Yes.
Nils Nielsen goes with Caroline, his yandere girlfriend, who takes him to the fucking ISS, the International Space Station, to make a new Plavsky particle so they can keep playing Gunpla. I love that in this world the ISS is used to make Gunpla. Fucking great.
Yeah,
Why
and that,
can't
like,
we use the ISS for that?
Yeah, that the world's like greatest genius. That's the thing that he's fixated on, and that, in fact, that like his whole character arc is that he initially is like interested in using Plavsky particles and all of that for the advancement of scientific research, and then eventually he learns that that's stupid. Like I should be using this to make like cool Gunpla stuff and make it even more fun. Because what's the point of using it to make? Because if he went down his normal life path, then 100 years later, Gundam Build Fighters would just turn into Gundam because someone would have found a way to make Plavsky particles be nukes or some shit. And
Yes.
instead, it's just they're really cool, fun toys because the early genius / samurai boy Niels Nielsen knows what's up.
Yeah, maybe that does lend some credence to your "this is Gundam Heaven" theory, because I can imagine the good uses of the Plavsky particle. It seems like there would be a pretty clear medical application for that, of like doing surgery under the skin without having to like make cuts. I feel like you could do something with that. But yes, obviously, if Nils Nielsen had worse instincts, he could make quite a weapon out of this thing. So it's good that he went to the ISS just to learn how to play Gunpla better.
Yes. And then while they're talking about Niels, I do want to shout out Carolyn Yajima, who's also, she's not like a big presence of the show, but I do love that character. I always love the, like, it's called the Nojo-sama character, like that archetype of like the rich girl who's just like ridiculous, and always has a butler with her named Sebastian, which is great. You get the full name reveal near the end when Sebastian breaks down the door and she looks, it's like, Sebastian, you're here, because for whatever reason Japanese people think all butlers are named Sebastian, like it's a legitimate trope. And then Carolyn Yajima is the centerpiece of what is my favorite episode of the show. I think pretty definitively for me is the Bear Gaison episode. I think is like just that episode is so perfectly plotted and put together, in her whole role in that of she's like, you know, this incredible painter and artist or whatever, but she always gets second place to China because China's like more creative and open and free and imaginative with her art, and Carolyn kind of does it by the book, and then that tying into the way that they make their Gunpla. It's just a really great story.
It's a
really
great episode, yeah.
Episode. And then Carolyn Yajima is voiced by, I just want to mention it because it's another Genshin Impact veteran, because it's Chiwa Saito doing a very different performance, but in Genshin she's a Jean Dancho from Mondstadt, as well as Shinjo Gahara in Bakemonogatari, one of my favorite shows. Very different kind of performance here. But I love her line read where in that episode, she interrupts Sei and Sheena when they're talking, and Sheena calls her Kero-chan, which is her like pet name for her. And she gets very upset about it. She says, "No, my name is Caroline. It's Caroline." And she tries to speak it in like a native English pronunciation, but it is like even more absurd and ridiculous. It is a fantastic line read, and I love it so much.
It's so good. She's great. I love her stuff at the end where she insists that she is Neil's girlfriend, and then at a certain point starts calling herself his fiance. Yes. And Neil's just like, "We've moved up?" Because like Nils never says no. He's just very surprised by it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a great dynamic.
It's great. Also, this has nothing to do with anything we were just saying, but I was flipping through some of my screenshots from the show, and I wound up on another line I wanted to mention from Mr. Ral, where they go to the ocean, and Reiji is swimming, and it's salty, and Sei turns to Ral and says, "Mr. Ral, is there an ocean that isn't salty?" And he just puts his like hand on his chin and goes, maybe in the colonies." It's fucking great. Good. So good. All right, we talked about Nils Nielsen. Well, I mean, there's a lot of all the different individual contestants are very good and like very vibrant. Obviously, the other big character from the tournament we haven't mentioned yet is Meijin Kawaguchi, Tatsuya Yuki, who is a really great character. Like, obviously, he's not as funny or entertaining as all these other figures because he is like the straight man of the show. But I really love how they play it, because I think at first you're almost like, are they going to be doing the like Char clone sort of thing here? And nominally, he's the guy who wears a visor. But other than that, I like that as we deepen the character near the end, his goal isn't to become like the unbeatable Meijin, it's to become the Meijin who inspires other people to have fun playing Gunpla. And the tragedy of the penultimate episode, and then the inspiration for all the stuff in the final episode, is saving him from that fate and helping him bring about that promise that he and Sei and Reiji made together. And I just love that we meet him in episode 2, and we kind of plant that flag, and he's the final opponent in the end. And again, it's one of those things where you know the shape of it as soon as you see it, but that doesn't make it any less satisfying.
Yeah, I think for Kawaguchi, that's where like all the best kind of dramatic plotting and stuff like that in the show is. Because he's definitely not the funniest character, but there's a lot of really great material around him. Like, what I just like want to point out, like where the name Meijin Kawaguchi comes from, because it's a reference. So Meijin in Japanese is just sort of like, means like expert or master at something.
The kanji is literally named person. So
yes,
yeah.
So someone who's like famous, but specifically famous for being like the best at whatever it is. Then Kawaguchi is a reference to a real life person who's Katsumi Kawaguchi, who works at Bandai, the hobby in like the division that makes Gunpla, but he's very famous as being like one of the best Gunpla builders in the world, and like he was like particularly like at the dawn of Gunpla, he was famous for being, you know, like the way he customized and built Gunpla figures. So when you have the scene pretty early in the show where they kind of explain a little bit what the Meijin Kawaguchi thing is, they have like a silhouette of an actual like older Japanese man who is there. That's clearly it's supposed to be, that is who the first Meijin Kawaguchi was. There's some character you'd never actually encounter who is the second Meijin Kawaguchi, who's the guy who's like, his whole philosophy is just win no matter what it takes. And then he becomes the third Meijin Kawaguchi. And yeah, I think that whole plot dynamic is really effective at kind of dramatizing a lot of the themes of the show, where, you know, Tatsuya's whole idea is to try to kind of change Gunpla from the inside, right? And sort of join the institution to try to change the institution. But it feels like it's like he's kind of misguided in that way, because in order to do that, he's sort of abandoned fundamentally like some of like his core principles. And you're introduced to that. And I think one of my favorite twists in the show is that very early on, this is like episode 6, or it's the very end of episode 5 is when you get the twist, and then 6 deals with it, is he drops out of the preliminary tournament when he had the promise with Sei and Reiji. And that's like the first sort of story arc in the show, is that whole dynamic of episode 1, you introduce Sei and Reiji in the premise and the setting. Episode 2, you meet Yuki Tatsuya, and you sort of get this sort of like promise of, well, they get defeated by him at the end of that episode, and they're like, that's why Deiji sticks around. That's why Deiji commits, is because he lost and saw how awesome Tatsuya Yuki was. And it's like, I want to beat that guy. well, how do we find him again? Let's go to the tournament, and we'll go to the tournament, and we'll beat him in the final round. And then right when they get to the final round, he drops out, and you find out he became Meijin Kawaguchi. That whole twist is so strong and I think effective at taking you from that opening phase of the story that's sort of putting all the pieces in place, and that's where it transitions into now it's about the world tournament and getting on that bigger stage and figuring out why did he drop out of the tournament, what's going on with this character, and then all that pays off so perfectly in the last 2 episodes of the show. It's just a very elegantly plotted character, I think, throughout the series.
And the whole Meijin Kawaguchi name, they're also like the idea of someone in the arts or something who like takes a name down through the ages is a Japanese thing. Like you'll see this a lot in kabuki, particularly. There's a movie by Kenji Mizoguchi that deals with this called The Story of the Last Chrysanthemums. It's one of his best movies, and it's about someone who is supposed to inherit, like he's someone the 14th would be like the next actor in this line, and he winds up leaving and trying to go on his own path. So there's a lot of like Japanese stories that deal with this, and there were you'll read about like famous kabuki actors who's someone the 15th or something like that, right? And I do love that now it's in this world it's applied to Gunpla battles. Is very funny. Is the timeline that the original Meijin Kawaguchi actually fought with Gunpla or just built them? Because obviously Gunpla is very new in this world in terms of battling.
I think the implication is that it is supposed to be Katsumi Kawaguchi who probably wouldn't have done any of the battling. Right. And I think that's part of supposed to be the dynamic is that when the second Meijin comes in, that's why his whole thing is about fighting and winning, is because because he's also like the corporate guy, right? He's like PPSE's guy that they bring in for their tournaments, and so his whole philosophy is just about winning no matter what. And then for whatever reason, then it has to get passed on, and Yuki Tatsuya comes up because Yuki Tatsuya somehow he's both at like this normal high school with everybody else, but he also has a backstory that he attended the Gunpla Academy or whatever. I think in Japanese they use the word juku, which means cram school, which would be an additional school you attend for like additional lessons. But the backstory seems a little bit convoluted and like not in a way I actually care about. But it is very funny that he has this like simultaneous like I was both just normal. I was the captain of the Gunpla model club at this school or whatever. But then also I was really going to the Gunpla Academy with this guy from Britain who he fights in like episode 18 or 19 or something.
Yeah, in my head, there's like a spin-off of this show that's basically Yu-Gi-Oh! GX where they're at the Duel Academy. I don't know. Is that what Build Fighters Try does? Because that seems like it would be fun. Okay.
No,
well,
but yes, that would be a good idea.
Yeah. Anyway, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, but with Gunpla, I'd watch that, especially if they had a bad rap song opening, which is my main thing I remember about Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. So, no, good character, good name. I love the whole idea, because I guess that also makes sense with PPSE probably, like, created the whole Meijin Kawaguchi thing as, like, a marketing thing, and then Yuki is trying to take it back. I really do like that those motivations are very well thought out, and it's a serious side of the show that works really well. And of course, their final battle is phenomenal. And in fact, I do want to transition into talking about some of that. So are there any other characters we need to hit on before we move on to some other stuff?
I don't think there are any other characters, but I do just want to mention with Meijin Kawaguchi that he does have like some of my favorite models in the show. In particular, so I think there's 2 mobile suit names that are like the 2 best names, because you mentioned Miss Sazabi before, which is like a great, incredible name. But there's also the Zaku Amazing, which is just what a fucking incredible name. Like the choice to put Amazing after Zaku is just so great. And the Zaku Amazing, that's one that I have wanted, because I have not made a Gunpla build of a Zaku yet, because the one I want to do is the Zaku Amazing. It's my favorite design for a Zaku, because it is I don't have like the red mobile suit fetish that you have, but the Zaku Amazing, I think there's something about the way that the black of the design breaks up a lot of the red that I think is a little bit too much for me in the Char Zaku, which I love the Char Zaku design, but there's something to the black like is a little bit more striking. The fact that it's got these like 2 giant fuck off like revolver pistols is so ridiculous in this very like what you'd call Chunibyo way of this is like it's like trying to be cool for cool's sake almost kind of thing. It's just a fucking incredible mobile suit, and Meijin Kawaguchi has, I think, hands down the 2 best themes in the show in terms of music, because he's got this like great like Spanish like Mexican flamenco guitar thing in his 2 kind of battle themes he has that just it's so good. Every time he has a big fight and his main theme starts playing, it's just the best fucking shit. And so he has the Zaku amazing, then he has the Kemper amazing, which is also very good, but it kind of just looks like a Kemper with some special weapons. It's not a particularly different design. And then he gets the amazing Exia. Mistake to put amazing in front of Exia in the title, but everything can't be perfect. But then he has, in the final episode, his amazing Exia gets fucked up, and then he comes in with, like, basically the Exia repair, more or less, with, like, the big cape on it. It's just, he gets some of the coolest fucking mobile suit and, like, Gunpla moments in the whole series. And you gotta respect the fucking Meijin for that.
Yeah. Zaku amazing. One, sounds like it should be the name of a Japanese rock band.
Uh-huh.
Two, definitely one I want to build. It's one that is also hard to find right now. I'm looking it up right now. It is the price gouge on Amazon to $70 for the high grade kit. Ooh, boy. That's a lot.
There's a reason why I haven't made it yet. So
yeah,
I've been waiting to find a good price to get it at.
He also they do the thing with the Exia where it loses an arm and they put the cape on it from 00 Gundam. Yes, please, more of that. It's wonderful. It's great. Yes, Meijin Kawaguchi, wonderful. And I think this is a good transition into the next part I want to talk about, which is... So this show obviously very inspired by G Gundam, and I think it learns a lot of good lessons from Mobile Fighter G Gundam, including, like, G Gundam clearly paved the way for how you can kind of break Gundam tonally out of its original box, right?
Yeah.
And I think laid a lot of that groundwork that this show benefits from. But I do think there are 3 specific flaws from G Gundam that this show is very careful to, like, correct. I already said one of those, which is instead of fewer characters in more episodes, it's more characters in fewer episodes. That's a huge improvement.
Yep.
2 is that the tournament makes sense. It's just like the tournament in G Gundam makes absolutely no logical sense and is impossible to follow on the level of, like, rules. It's not the biggest problem in the world, but it is an issue with that show. Like, especially me being someone who, like, loves, like, the Tenkaichi Budokai format. Like, just give me a, like, top 16, top 8, top 4, top 2. That's what I want, right? Yeah. And they just kind of go with that. There is that middle section in Build Fighters where they're, like, doing the qualifiers, but even there, they make it much clearer that, like, it's 7 events and you're going to have points, and then that gets you into the top 16. It's a little convoluted, but it's totally fine and makes sense. So, tournament that makes sense just gives the show a much better spine and, like, forward momentum. But the biggest thing is, G Gundam has many wonderful things, but it doesn't have very good fights. There's some good action scenes, especially near the end. There's some great set pieces. I don't know if there's any one scene in Gundam Build Fighters quite as great as, like, Master Asia's death, right?
Yeah.
But the fights in G Gundam are not very good, and the fights in Gundam Build Fighters are among the best in the entire series. And that is, like, that is the piece de resistance, is that when you get a fight in Gundam Build Fighters, I don't think there's a single disappointing one in the show. There are some that are, like, clearly, like, the best, but they are all good, and they are all reliably great, and they all take advantage of the fact that this is not actual Gundam life or death battles in space. It is plastic models battling, so you can just go all out. You can have Gundams losing arms and legs, where if Amuro lost the Gundam's arm in every episode of Mobile Suit Gundam, Captain Bright would have to slap him a bit, right? That really wouldn't work. That you have to save that for special moments. But fuck it, the Star Build Strike, it's going to get fucked up every time it goes out, and it's just really spectacular. And I'm sure we can talk about specific fights that are our favorites, but you really can't go wrong. This show just delivers consistently extraordinary action set pieces.
Yeah, because it knows how to be able to tell its story through the action, right? Like, that's part of the point of them having a big action scene in every single episode, is that the episode is, like, focused around getting, like, to that fight and kind of setting up the dynamic of what that fight's going to be, either in a very explicit way with the tournament fights where you know it's going to be building up to this specific fight between these two combatants, or in, like, the sort of smaller side episodes that aren't focused on a tournament fight. You still are building up the character dynamics and the things like that are eventually going to culminate in these characters fighting each other. And there's always a smart sense of, there's a twist, there's a specific sort of, like, gimmick or take or something like that the fight hinges on that gives it sort of definition and clarity, right? So, like, one I think that stands out to me is you have the big battle royale that happens early in the tournament that starts where you have the episode 11, the battle royale one, which is, like, you know, all this kind of chaos and madness, and it starts with them up in space, and then eventually they get shot and they end up down on Earth, and you have a great sequence with all the sort of, like, jilted ex-boyfriends of all the like women that Fellini has cheated with are all trying to gun for him, and that whole dynamic is great. But then it culminates in the mega-sized Zaku coming out, which is an incredible set piece that then the next episode 12, Discharge, is basically all about this fight with this giant Zaku, which I love is just because everything else is like that 1 to 144 scale. This is like a 1 to 72 or something scale Zaku, so it's not actually a giant Zaku, because it's just a different scale thing, but like because everything is shrunk down relatively more to what they're supposed to be, it being a big Zaku relative to the size of an actual Zaku makes it look big in this like toy world. I think it's just like a very funny idea, and so they figure out that's the only time they ever do something like that, right? They never have this is a fight against a giant mobile suit. So they pick and choose like interesting set pieces and just play that set piece, design it around that set piece, and then have a narrative function behind it. So like, why have the giant mega-sized model Zaku? Well, because that's when the chairman interferes. And so him being the guy up top, he has access to whatever resources he can. So that's how you can have the fight against the giant mobile suit. In a normal tournament fight, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? And so you get the whole, like, the system trying to kind of push them down and keep them from winning idea, and deliver that through the action. And they do that in every single episode, right? Like, one of my favorites, as I said, my favorite episode in the show, and I think one of the coolest fights, is episode 9 in Wings of Imagination, where in that climactic fight, you have Bear Guy-san fighting against the SD Night Gundam, and the whole thing being about the point of the episode is that Sheena's imagination and creativity opens her up to ideas that Sei is struggling with because he's trying to figure out how to push the build strike to the next level, which eventually is the Star Build Strike, and he can't do that. And Sheena's imagination, which you see at the beginning of the episode in her painting, is also reflected in her the way he approaches her gunpla, and so her sticking cotton inside the Bear Guy-san, because that's what the setting is that it's a teddy bear that has like come to life and turned into a plastic like robot or whatever. She has expressed that in a way that nobody else would have thought of, and then that allows her to win the fight in the end. It's like, that's such an elegant way to tell the story of that episode through a fight scene, that the dynamic of that fight, the Bear Guy-san versus Night Gundam, is unlike any other fight in the series. And not every single episode is quite to that level of being able to do all that, because that'd be like impossible to do, because it's very hard to find that level of elegance and construction. But there are a lot of episodes in the show that are able to just so tightly narratively intertwine all those elements together. And that's the thing to me that makes the fights and the battles as good as they are, is that all that stuff plays off of each other so perfectly.
Yes, absolutely. It's so true. Because like the choreography and the animation and the music and all of that is great. But it doesn't matter much without the story behind it, and the storytelling and the character work is so good. Because the basic setup, episodically, the structure of the whole show is you have a first half of an episode that sets up those dynamics, and then the fight is always paying those off, right?
Yes.
And that's not like a new idea. Pokemon roughly does something like that, only over 1,000 episodes. But like, this show does it so well and with such focus. And I think the last stretch of episodes, starting with 17, which is when the final 16, like the main tournament bracket starts, every single battle is so good. And every one of those episodes is great. And it's because at that point, you're exclusively working with characters we know really well, and you're often giving them their kind of final big story. So episode 17, Model of the Heart, is Mao's big, like, fighter finale. He has other scenes past that point, but this is going to be his time to shine, and his fight very much reflects some of the character struggles he's going with in the first half of that episode. Same thing with Nils in episode 19. Same thing with Ayla when we get to, like, the two-parter that's about her. And then you get to Meijin Kawaguchi, and you have that, the Meijin versus Meijin episode, which is so good. You have the character Julian Ayres Mackenzie, whose grandpa got through the whole tournament basically just to kick him back into doing Gunpla again, because he had walked away because Gunpla wasn't fun anymore. And we find out his Gunpla is a red F91.
Yep.
God, Sean, could they make a mobile suit more for me than a red F91?
I mean, I think that we sent our F91 podcast back in time, and then you know, the makers of the show listened to it, and they're like, well, we got to make this because in like 8 years' time, this motherfucker's going to watch this show, and we got to make sure that there's a red F91 for him. So yes, I think that's what they did.
But that one is a great character story about those two guys, and especially about Kawaguchi, about Yuki, is a really good episode for him. And yeah, so the fights are always... they're always fun. They make you want to applaud. They're just great things to watch. But then they also have such immense character payoff, especially down that home stretch. But yeah, in early episodes too, as you say, the Bear Guy one is just, if you want to break down the basic formulaic structure of the show, is as good an example of how that formula works as the show provides.
Yeah, I think it is fundamentally the thing that makes the show as good as it is. Like, I think that's the key, that it's the most important thing for it to nail, for it to be at the level that it's hitting at all times, and why it's like such a great example of like the genre itself, is that level of like episodic plotting is so tight and elegant, that the characters, the themes, and then the action core construction and all that dovetails together every single episode for a like really great rousing climax, right? And it's like most episodes of the show, you get to the end of the fight and you want to like jump off your feet and shout because it's like really exciting, and in that sports way, right? Because it's not exciting because of like the death-defying antics of the characters, where you're like, it's not a Tomino show where you're like, oh god, is every single character going to die? Are we close enough to the end of the episode that's going to happen yet? There's nothing like that. It's the risks are just like, because for most of them you like all the characters, so it's like you kind of are rooting for Mao, right? And at the same time you're rooting for Seineji because you like both of them, and so that dynamic is very rich in the kind of the sports competition part of it, that you're rooting for people in the way that people are into like football or basketball or whatever will root for their team. It's got that core to it as well.
Yeah. Are there any fights you want to shout out in particular? Other than, like, I want to talk about, like, the very end of the show. The last 2 episodes are so good, they deserve a little extra attention, but...
Yeah, the last 2 are definitely, like, in terms of action, that's the highlight. I mean, that's where they budget the show very well to get that. I do also, like, you have, in episode 23, you have that smaller fight between Sei and Deiji that is very fun.
It's really cool, yeah.
That's, like, a really good kind of, like, teaser or setup for kind of what the finale is going to be about. I also got to kind of go back to my boy Fellini, that their big fight that at the end of the preliminaries that comes to a standstill where they get a draw, right? And they just rip each other's gunpla to shreds. It's a pretty fucking amazing episode, because that's where you have that whole flashback sequence to Fellini building his Fenice, and you realize that's the reason why it looks the way it has, is because he rebuilds it every time, and how precious it is to him while everything is getting ripped to pieces. Pretty fucking great scene.
Well, and it's the most, like, shonen anime-ass thing of, like, Fellini could just, like, let them win because he's already going to be in, and he wants Sei and Reiji to advance to the finals because he's helped them and he's taught them and he wants to fight them, so he could just kind of give up and then Sei and Reiji would go through, but Sei and Reiji don't want to win like that, and Fellini is too proud in his Fenice to let that happen, and so they just fight to the fucking death. Is that where we first get the like, build fist? Is in that one? Or
build
is that
knuckle?
Later? The build knuckle.
Think that might be it. I don't remember.
But it's, yeah, as you say, it is very rousing. I love that one. I love it's a short fight, but the one in like episode 6 where they fight Yuki. Yuki comes back even though he's become Meijin just to fight them for fun, and they get ripped to shreds. They totally lose. Yeah. We really don't even see much of the fight, but I love that the whole point of that is that it excites them. It doesn't discourage them. Like that's the core character dynamic. I already mentioned I love Mao's final fight. I think is really creative. I think Nil's final fight with the Sengoku Astre is fantastic. They're at a certain point, it's almost not worth picking individual ones out. They're all so good.
I gotta shout out. I don't know if you call it a fight, but the baseball match that happens.
Yes.
That's a pretty great classic. Like, because it's one of the things where the show I think it loves. Because we've mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot. Like, the show is not one of those shows, kind of, because it's not 300 episodes long, right?
Right.
Because the reason why a show like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon are going to have the random baseball episodes, or literally Dragon Ball Super has the baseball episode in it, right? Where it's like, the reason why you end up having those is because you need the filler episode. Like, you just can't have the big dramatic plotting, either because it's based on some source material that you're adapting at the same time, or whatever's going on. There are lots of reasons why those shows end up with the random one where you're like, are they playing baseball all of a sudden?
Well, you say Dragon Ball Super, but that's because Yamcha becomes a baseball player in Dragon Ball Z.
That's a good point.
In a filler episode in the Saiyan arc when they're just filling time while the manga is going.
Yeah, and so it's like kind of a classic trope of those kinds of shows that just go every episode a week for years and years and years out of necessity. And I love that Gundam Build Fighters takes the time to occasionally do that kind of thing, not because it needs to, but because it's like fun, and it's like because it's doing it with such intentionality, it like plays better for me than it would if it was an actual filler episode, because it also does like tie directly into the plot. It's not irrelevant in the way that a lot of those episodes can tend to be very irrelevant in those kinds of shows. So like that baseball one is a great example of that, and then also the Gunpla Yakuza like traditional Japanese like ryokan episode is another great example of, in another series it would very much be a kind of just like random filler, but here it feels very special and fun because it's this, you know, why does this traditional Japanese ryokan have a Gunpla arena like in the shed in the back? Why is this Yakuza heavy dude like happens to be this ex-pro, and he's just like, yes, I'll beat you with my giant fuck off Gunpla. Like that, the warmth of heart and like the openness the show has to just do random one-off episodes that have very absurd premises, even for this show that is based on an absurd premise, they're even way outside those bounds. Like those episodes also have really great like action and beats like that to them.
Yes. All right, so let's talk about the final two, Dark Matter and Promise. Dark Matter, of course, is pretty much all the one big battle between Meijin Kawaguchi and Seihin Reiji, and it is such a phenomenal fight. Like, obviously, there's the higher stakes to this one, where it's still not life or death, but it is that Kawaguchi is having his mind controlled, and so they want to try to free him. The fight is extra brutal because of what's going on, and of course, you know it's good, because it's where they bring back the best goddamn theme song and have it play over the big final fight. In terms of a one-on-one match, it's the best one in the series. The choreography, the movement, the animation, it is tremendous. And then doing it over that theme song, which we'll have to talk about in a second, is just tremendous. Yeah,
no, it's great. The whole dynamic of them, of the chairman and Miss Baker changing the field as the fight goes on is a great dynamic. And that has that big mid-episode turn of where for the first half of the episode, they're just getting their ass destroyed by the Gundam, the Exi Amazing. And then he has them pinned to the wall, right, with like the two swords, and then they kind of realize what's happening, that he's being controlled, and they rouse themselves back. And that whole thing of they like detach the one arm from the Star Build Strike, and then take the sword. They take the sword with the other and are fighting him, Yuki, with his own sword, and then later they get the arm back and put it back on and do the double build knuckle with like the classic, you're like, you have these two shots basically of zooming in on, one's on Reiji's eyes, one's on Sei's eye, and they're intercut with each other every couple of frames, and so it's like flashing really quick as you're zooming into both of them as they do the big double build knuckle hit. And they make the absolutely legendary fucking choice to have one of the Gundam's eyes get blown off early in the fight. So it's got this like one eye, like you might as well put a fucking eye patch on the goddamn thing, like the H2 Darkhound in Gundam Age. So it's only got this one glowing green eye for the fight. Just so fucking sick. That little extra detail is where that's where you feel the Gundam Build Fighters team. That's where they know what they're doing. Is it's not just we're going to have this really incredible action sequence. Also, it's going to be this rad fucked up Gundam that only has the one eye throughout it.
Yes, absolutely. It's seriously, Sean, I was like on my feet. I was like a little bit out of my chair. I was so close to the edge. I was like when they won and they win the tournament, I was cheering. I was like applauding. I like was fist pumping in the air. It just made you want to like move physically. It is that effective and that affective on the viewer. It's a really tremendous episode. And I do think that has something to do with using a theme song that you called out back in your Best of the Decade episode. We actually used it as the theme song on that episode of the Weekly Stuff podcast. If you haven't heard it, there's an episode from late 2019 or early 2020 where Sean lists his 10, but really 50 favorite anime of the 2010s. Build Fighters was one of them, and you call out that theme song, Nibun no Ichi, and I played it that week. I'm like, that's a really good song. And then I heard it with this. That is easily one of the best Gundam theme songs. It is so perfect. It is so fitting. I like the second theme song in this show, but it's very much a Victory Gundam case where like the first theme song is just so perfect, you just really shouldn't replace it. and its use here in that final fight, where they actually use the entire 3-minute track, and the fight is synced to it. Like, it's not just that, like, they laid it over. It's pretty well choreographed to the rises and falls of that song. But man, I love that song lyrically. I love that song just musically. It got me pumped every time. I love the animation that goes along with it. It is one of the best theme songs we've had for Gundam, full stop.
Nibu no Ichi is just incredible. You know, I love any J-rock song that has a big rap breakdown in the middle is always I'm always gonna love. And I love that they make sure the rap breakdown is in the opening. They don't like do a version of it where they don't get to the rap breakdown or something, which sometimes happens. So actually both of these opening themes, and then one of the opening themes in Try, and then the theme they use in the Try like OVA, all of those are by this band called Back On. That is a very good J-rock band. The second one from this show, which is the song Wimp, also has a female vocal artist, Lil Fang, from a different band, who she's like on that track as well. But yes, Nibu no Ichi, just incredible. Just like an all-time great, like shonen style J-rock kind of opening. And part of what I think pushes it over the edge for me is not just that the song's so good, but the lyrics are so on point. I think one of the reasons why it works so well in that scene in the penultimate episode is because the lyrics are about like two people working together and like compensating for each other's weaknesses and becoming a better whole. So like Nibu no Ichi means one half, and it's, you know, any shonen show that is going to start the theme song with this like pulsing drum beat, which is true of every Back On song. They have like this really great core drum beat that really gets you pumped up. But then you have the first lyric is the singer just like belting out the words Hitori Janai, which means you're not alone, which is just the most shonen, just like immediately. It's like, this is a song about friendship and togetherness and companionship and that overcoming the odds. Like, that's just what the lyrics of the song are about. And it's just so good. Like, it's so wholesome and warm and powerful in this very kind of childish way that it's great. It's just it's the perfect theme song for the show. It just represents the show kind of in a nutshell to me, in every way. Nibu no Ichi. It'll definitely be, when we do our rankings, it'll be somewhere on the best Gundam songs, because it's definitely up there for me.
Yeah, it'll make it into my main list. It'll be very high on this like year 3, season 3 list when we do that. In contention with some of the best ones we've heard, because it is fantastic. The final episode, Promise Yakusoku, does a similar thing. It uses the second song, Wimp, very effectively. I actually think it's used more effectively in that episode than it is like as the theme song. Like, used at like full length on that final fight is great. But I love the final episode where it does this ridiculous thing where the Plavsky particles are like spreading across the arena, and so they all have to have their Gundams out and have this big fight to try to go destroy the crystal that is now at the heart of an Abawa coup that has been summoned. And it's really just an excuse to have all of the different cool Gunpla we've seen throughout the series come together and fight, and it pays off because it is so fun to see all the different crazy things. We already talked about my favorite moment, which is where Lieutenant Ral gets in his goof and fights with the G Gundam, but there are so many good beats in that, and it is just a fun celebratory, like, it is Gundam heaven, basically. It is just like a great celebration of all things Gundam.
Yeah, because that episode, like, the first half of it is just that giant action sequence that is just, let's throw all the budget we've saved at the wall and just, like, do everything you can think of. Like, the scale of the action is so absurd. But yeah, just getting to see everybody, you know, the Bear Guy-san and the Night Gundam is there. Just Miss Sazabi comes in. There's everyone joining the fight is so great. And I just, I think that it's just the perfect idea of, we have had this whole show that is about, like, the triviality of this hobby itself being the point and all of these things. And then, you know, it feels very fitting that then the last episode is about, and now here, like, this is the only time something actually serious has happened. Like, this feels like it's dangerous. People could get hurt because this like, these Plavsky particles are going out of control and we've got to stop it. And it's because of our bonds of companionship and friendship and the lessons we've learned about, like, stick-to-itiveness and gumption and all the good things you learn by doing the sport. It has built us up enough that we can use those and who we are to kind of save the day, and it's just a very kind of celebratory episode, right? Like, that whole first half just feels like a big celebration of the show as a whole, as everyone gets their big kind of hero moment, almost like, you know, the end of fucking Avengers Endgame or something like that is basically the kind of scene they're doing.
Yeah, it is basically like the Avengers Endgame of Gundam, and it's very good. But then the show does find room for having a just incredibly thematically on-point conclusion in bringing it back at the end where there's a few Plavsky particles left, Yuki Senpai is back to his old self, and so they're able to have one last match, but the particles are disappearing. So they're having their fight, and in that fight, the chairman disappears, which means that Reiji is seemingly disappearing. And so, of course, if you've seen Yu-Gi-Oh!, if the boy comes from out of the other dimension or the past or something, he's in the pilot, he's going to have to leave in the final episode. So we're going to have to do this with Reiji. It's totally predictable, but that's not the point. Predictable is not a bad thing. It is such a good version of this story in that what they really do and what Reiji shows Sei in that final fight in giving the controls over to him is that he has, like, one, I love Reiji's line about the reason you couldn't pilot so well is because you love your Gunpla too much. But now you've seen that everyone has that passion, and so you'll be able to do it. And so Sei is able to fight and is able to say goodbye to Reiji. It's beautifully staged. It's such a good scene. And then, of course, we are able to end on a gag with Isla going with Reiji and calling him an idiot as they go off to their new life together in the other dimension. But it really just... It is amazing what a good emotional core the show has built up and is able to leverage in those final minutes.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite conclusions to a Gundam show because there's something so kind of beautifully fairy tale. It's like kind of Peter Panish almost, like this whole, like this feeling of, the particles are leaving, right? Like we have these last brief moments of kind of like magic, basically. And then obviously, later, the early genius goes to space and he reinvents magic for us so that we can continue to play our robot games. But for this moment, it's like this will be the last Gunpla battle on Earth. And the way that everybody then rushes to go because of course it's my boy Fellini. First, he takes the fucking arms off of the Gundam Fenice and gives them to Sei and Reiji. And it's how much, it's been built up that these models are like, this is these people's lives. They've poured so much of like their blood, sweat, and tears into those things, and the immediacy with which they just like give up pieces of them to kind of cobble together a star build strike that can do the fight. And the same thing with Kawaguchi. That whole dynamic is just it gets me a little bit choked up at the end of the show because of how much it feels like it has rewarded these like these light but meaningful character relationships throughout the whole thing come to a head here. And then the whole way they play off Reiji like disappearing at the end where, he hands off the controls to Sei. I love that as Sei is fighting, he's doing a really good job. And there's this almost like manic look in Reiji's face, right? Like his eyes go wide and he's like, yes, good, you're doing it. Like you can see, it feels like he's like kind of like having to bottle up whatever like feelings he's having because he's also leaving behind his best buddy as he's going to his new world. And then he disappears right at the moment they're about to do their high five that they do at the end of all their like big fights that they win. It's like, it's just, you couldn't have possibly put together that sequence better. It's just so beautifully done and pays off your investment in these characters. It's just such a memorable finale to the show.
It hits the heartstrings in every place you want them to be hit, better than you thought they could be hit.
Yeah.
And it also, it actualizes one of the main themes of this and every other sports anime, which is that the act of playing and being challenged, whether you win or lose, is the actual fun part of it, right? Like, the heroes of these stories, they would like to win, but their ultimate goal is just to fight the next strongest person. I mean, that's also battle anime. That's also Dragon Ball. That's Goku, right? And they're doing it there at the end where everyone coming together and giving those different pieces is because they love the fight. They want to see this fight. They want to be able to do this, whatever comes of it. And it's just a really, really good version of that story. A lot of these ideas are not necessarily like brand new and original to Gundam Build Fighters. They're just done so ludicrously well. And I like that fairy tale aspect of it too, Sean. It does have this Reiji isn't actually an imaginary friend, but there is that kind of sense of like the imaginary friend or the fairy tale boy who comes in and kind of spruces your life up and then leaves. It is beautifully done, and it is tear-jerking, and it is affective in the way this show is just very affective. It gets you cheering, it gets you laughing, it gets you crying here at the end. It is a Gundam show that is and a sports show that is full of affect, as this sort of thing should be, but is honestly is hard to do at this level that this show is doing it.
Yeah. Because it is, I think a big part of it is like the attention to detail, you know, because another thing they do in that scene that is so good is Kira running off and grabbing a like video camera and her coming back and her filming it like the last Gunpla fight. It's those little details that like make it so special, because it's this thing where you feel how much love and care the creators are putting into the show, that they're not, while like, you know, there is the big kind of genre formula that they're playing with. There is no formula for those little moments. Those are things that are so inventive, that they're creating here that just very naturally spur from all these characters being together, that it feels like as soon as Kira like runs off screen, even if you haven't seen the show before and you don't know, oh, this is what she's going to go grab the camera, I think you feel that that's what's going to happen, because you just know these characters so well that this is what happens when you put all these pieces together, because they built it so perfectly.
Absolutely. And then you have a very fun epilogue several years in the future, everyone doing their thing with their ISS Plavsky particles.
Yep.
And a great fight, and it also knows the exact moment we're going to end on, which is Sei stepping out at the next tournament on his own now, but with Reiji in his heart, thinking about the promise they made, and we leave it open to your imagination. Perfect ending.
Absolutely. Accompanied with I do also really love the first ending to the show. I think is good, but I have a lot of love in my heart for Hanpan Spirit, or like, which is basically Short Pants Spirit, by Hyadain, which is also the guy who does the songs, the two openings for Nichijou, which is a show I love. Like, it's one of the, I think, the best comedy anime. It's a very distinctive style, but the very like light and kind of like nostalgic feel to the song I just love so much. And the way they do the ending on normal episodes, where they take like the freeze frame and as like a screenshot, and then they like sort of age it or whatever, and then have the ending play around it is great. But here, the whole ending playing over the ending of the show is awesome.
Well, it's actually really cool because, for 3 of the 4, they don't use the first ending, but 3 of the 4 get special uses in the final 2 episodes. So you get Nibu no Ichi over the final fight with Meijin, you get the second opening, you get Wimp over the big final battle at Abaoku, and then you get Hanpan Spirit here at the end, and it's really well used. I like Hanpan Spirit a lot, too. I think it grew on me. I think one of the things it does that I love is that it really thematizes around the animation, too, in a really great way. I love anime endings that do that. We talked about that with the second Gundam Age ending does something like that, too. Mm-hmm. And it's also, like, visually creative in the way, like, the first 00 ending is. It doesn't look like other anime endings, or certainly other Gundam endings. So, yeah, it's very good, and I think the lyrics are, it's kind of like Nibu no Ichi. It has a really great, like, connection to the show, and that whole idea of, like, this, childlike wonder in things, and putting that over at the end, it gives it this extra impact it doesn't have just as the ending song that, you see there at the end every time, right? It's really good. The singer is so auto-tuned on that one, and I do like the way it uses auto-tune, but it's so auto-tuned, he actually reminds me of, like, the male Vocaloid in the Hatsune Miku games.
Yes.
I even checked for a second, because I did not know the artist, I haven't seen Nichijou, and I was looking at him like, is this just like a Vocaloid song? And it's not, but I do enjoy that style, it's very charming.
Yeah, I'll post on Twitter for this podcast, because I just realized I probably should have done that before. But you should also watch the music video he made for this song, because it is a great, very weird music video. But it's basically like what the lyrics are about is like, this childhood nostalgia. That's like that Hanpan thing is like the like shorts that like kids, little boys wear and stuff like that. And it's like about this guy, like this old man way in the future, like remembering himself being a kid, and like these shorts he had that he really loved. It's like this, there's like weird Back to the Future time travel shit in it. It is like a wacky but fantastic music video that people should watch. But yeah, that childish spirit to the song is really well reflected in the show.
Well, and speaking of music, the one big thing we haven't said too much about yet is the musical score by Yuki Hayashi, which is stupendous. It's so good.
Yeah, it's one of the best scores we've had in a while, where like Gundam shows typically have very good scores, but it's been a little bit since we've had one that I think is just like a great score. And this is one of my favorite scores for a Gundam show. Like it's very different than most Gundams, but it's so fucking good.
Yeah, it's almost on like and he's worked with this person, so it makes sense, a Hiroyuki Sawano side of things, where it's very inventive with its instrumentation, how it uses electronic elements, the little vocal elements it brings in, like in the battle themes we have, where it's like people saying words over the music, which just really gets you pumped. It's just like every track, and it's introducing great new pieces all the way to the end, because it's 25 episodes. Yeah. It's not like you're going to have to go crazy with reusing things. Yuki Hayashi, after this, when we already said My Hero Academia, he also scores Haikyuu. Yeah. Those two alone, I can't believe one person does both of those. That seems like that would be a very busy job. But it makes sense that he had done stuff before this, but really blew up after Gundam Build Fighters, and it makes total sense because, of course you would. It's just that good a score.
Yeah, and it's the thing I love. It is true of his other work that I've seen, is like he's just very eccentric with some of like the instrumentation and genre choices he makes. So, and I think it's something he kind of borrows a little bit from G Gundam, is because you have characters from different places of the world. He'll throw in like different musical styles and elements in there.
All the stuff with Fellini where he uses like accordion and stuff. Oh, yes. I love it. It's so good.
And then I think maybe my favorite element is you have the song that usually plays at the very beginning of a fight, that you have this countdown from 5 in this super gnarly distorted voice, like embedded in the song. It's like 5, boom, 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 4, and it just counts down to 1, 0, and then they usually launch. It's like there's so much like weird creativity. It's just such a weird score. But then it also has like the big swelling, like big action themes at the end of episodes and stuff like that you would very much associate with his work from My Hero Academia, that I think like is one of the like critical pieces that make that show work. Like if that score for My Hero was not as good as it was, it would be a significantly like weaker show. And he brings a similar quality here of like when the music needs to be very important, it like nails what it needs so well.
So I'm looking at his list of credits, and he's got so much cool stuff going on. He's currently scoring the Dragon Quest anime that's ongoing that I've heard nothing but great things about. I need to watch it. He's doing the Shaman King reboot they're doing,
right?
Which I don't think has premiered yet, or it's about to premiere. And he took over Pokemon in 2019. Pokemon had the same composer from its debut in 97, and now the new composer, I think when they switched to the Sword and Shield version of the anime, Yuki Hayashi took over. So Pokemon and Haikyuu, shows we've referenced a bunch in this discussion, he's doing both of those now.
This is a busy fucking dude. Like, that's a lot of very high profile stuff to be working on.
This kind of music would fit so well with Pokemon. I want to go see some of those episodes now. I bet that fits really well.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, it's a tremendous score, and it's one of many things that makes this show feel like a unique being and entity unto itself, in the same way G Gundam, what's his name? What's the composer who did G Gundam? We love him.
Spot.
Yes. He does everything.
Because it's also the Gravity Rush Man,
One Piece,
Sakura Tyson Man, One Piece. I should be able to think of this.
I have it. It's Kohei
Tanaka.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we got to it at the same second. Yeah. Kohei Tanaka, like G Gundam just sounded totally unlike other Gundam scores, right? And G Gundam is so driven by its score. It's still one of the best. And this very much feels like it's a very different score. It doesn't sound like G Gundam, but it's in that lineage of really just cutting loose and having fun with it.
Yeah, it's fucking great. It's like I said, like we've had some good Gundam scores in recent shows, but nothing for a while that to me has been like this. This is one of the ones I think of when I say like Gundam has just like incredibly great history with music. Like it's just as a franchise, it's one of those things that you wouldn't necessarily assume that the soundtracks for Gundam shows would just like be uncommonly really excellent. But this is one of those where you point at it's like, yeah, look at this fucking thing. Like how good the score is.
Absolutely. But the whole show. I mean,
yeah.
I said at the beginning, this is practically a perfect show. The more we talk about it, the more I love it. It's going to rank very highly, I think, when we do our overall rankings. It is, and it's a little hard to compare to other Gundam shows because it is a very different beast. But it is as good as I could imagine this kind of thing being. Frankly, it's better than I would imagine this kind of thing being. It is better than... I knew I would probably like this because this sounds like the kind of thing that is very my shit. I liked it more than I thought I would. I loved it. It is a really tremendous show.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, there is a reason why they have, like, then this has, like, spawned its own sub-franchise, basically, because it is just that good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anything else to say about Gundam Build Fighters before we take a little break and start watching Build Fighters Try?
Yeah, so I guess let's look forward ahead to the next series. So one thing I want to mention about Build Fighters Try, because I want to set you up appropriately for this, Jonathan, because I think I think I talked about it in the first episode of this podcast, that when I first watched Build Fighters Try, I did not like that show that much, and this will be the second time I've watched it. So I'm very interested to see how I feel watching it this time. But I think one of the reasons why I was disappointed by that show is I went in expecting it to be more of a direct sequel to Build Fighters than it actually is. So Build Fighters Try is set in the same universe, very definitively. It has some characters that do cross over, but don't go in expecting it to be a Zeta Gundam-esque, like, you're not going to pick up any major threads with Sei or Reiji. They don't really factor into the show in almost any way at all. And I think that I was very disappointed by that, because I feel like the end of Build Fighters, you love those characters so much, and you're left with this promise of, I want to fight you, say, when you're even better. And you're like, and then they make a sequel like 1 year later. Like, if it's set in the same world, you get some crossover characters. Surely you must then have these characters factor in again in the Zeta Gundam-esque way, and they don't. So I think if you go in without having any of those expectations, it should hopefully for me be able to like appreciate the show better, like on its own terms, and less as like something that has to be an extension of Gundam Build Fighters, because while it is a sequel, it is a bit of its own thing on top of that.
I'm okay with that. I honestly, that's kind of what I was expecting, and from the end of this show, I don't need any more with. I love Sei and Reiji, but like, the ending to me isn't, I need to see what their fight will be, it's that I love that the potential exists, and that's the right note to end on. So, I would just as soon, I see new characters, have them fight more Gunpla, I'm good with that.
Yeah, so again, next time we will watch Gundam Build Fighters Try, and then the episode after that will be our big catch bag, where we'll watch the GM's Counterattack, which is a sort of OVA sequel to Gundam Build Fighters. We'll also watch Tri Island Wars, which is the OVA sequel to Gundam Build Fighters Try, the Gundam Battle Log specials, which are like 11-minute shorts, and the beginning G 3-minute or 3-part 40-minute OVA. So like all those little extra ones, if you're wondering like when you should be watching those, like if you want to watch it along with us, wait for those. All of those will be in a third episode after we cover Try. The next episode will just be Gundam Build Fighters Try. So look forward to that. Next time on Weekly Suit Gundam.